Chapter 401, Matchmaking. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Kojuro didn't try fighting the shadow possession for too long. There was a thing called knowing when you are beaten, and Ringo made sure it was beaten into the Kiri recruits fairly early on. After all, nobody could know if there will be an opportunity to escape once you get captured. Hence, surrendering was preferable. The whole order of importance of actions in Kirigakure was winning, and if that can't be done, then escaping. If escaping was not an option, then surrendering and surviving should be prioritized before dying. Naturally, Kirigakure had quite brutal anti-torture methods which were simply put their recruits under the skilled hands of a master torturer, so they were aware of what kind of experience it was and could resist it better later on. Honestly, not many could measure up to Kirigakure's torture master, so Kiri ninjas seldom cracked under torture. Since Ringo took over, Kiri gained a reputation for spitting out some tough but also smart cookies out of their training program. Of course, they were still assassins, so if surrendering and escaping was not an option, well, death was also a kind of escape. But that was really the final and most drastic measure. In this kind of situation, giving up actually earned some points for Kojuro, as Chunin was not a rank for people who didn't know when to stop. A leader has to be able to assess the situation and decide to call a retreat when a retreat is needed. And while his showing was definitely not enough to earn him a rank up by the Chunin exam standards, that didn't matter for him anyway. After all, it was not Konoha officials that decided if he gets promoted or not. It was Ringo. Kojuro had to impress her, not the current judges. Unfortunately for him, he could be almost certain his previous showing was definitely not impressive for the current Mizukage. She did not send him here to have a quick match and lose on top of that. He was supposed to show off the might of Kirigakure, but he didn't do much of that. Kojuro was in for a very painful reprimand, followed by even more painful long training months once he arrived back at Kirigakure. That was for sure. Ringo's eyebrow was twitching at how fast the match passed. It didn't last even 2 full minutes, and half of that time was just the boys staring at each other. Sure, the battles between ninjas are often finished instantly, but this was the Chunin exams. This was the platform where ninjas had to show off. She even ordered Reiga to train the kid, and this was the result? After all that annoying complaining Reiga put up in hope she would get fed up and stop that order? It was simply beyond disappointing. Well, this match passed certainly quickly. Shikaku tried to start a conversation with Ringo, whose eyebrow was visibly twitching. He felt it was his duty not just as the current Hokage but also as the father of the boy who, unknowingly humiliated the Kiri contestant and by that probably pissed off the extremely dangerous woman sitting next to him. Shikaku doubted the red-headed Mizukage would be so petty and put a high bounty on a genin. Especially not on a son of the Hokage. But she was a former member of the 7 swordsmen of Kirigakure, and these were almost in every case extreme nut jobs. One could never be sure with them. So, just in case, Shikaku wanted to make sure while attempting to calm down any ruffled feathers. But I guess it is natural. The boy from your village was certainly at a disadvantage. I apologize for that. The match UPS are random. Shikaku continued and smiled apologetically at Ringo, only for her to snort when she heard that. My mood swings are more random than these match UPS. She grumbled under her nose, loud enough for every present Kage to hear her, which made Shikaku's smile freeze as the other Kages chuckled. But don't worry. I am not mad at your boy. He fought well, and I am certainly not gonna kill him just because Tsunade is a bitch who rigged the matches in her village's favor. Ha, every Kage does it, so there is no problem with that. She rolled her eyes and instantly killed any follow-up conversation that might have occurred. The other Kages did not even try to give some childish and subtly insulting remark on how easily Kojuro lost after hearing that. Mostly because what she said was the truth. Every Kage tried to give the participants from his village an edge. And if the Chunin exam happened to be in their villages, well, naturally they would reflect that desire. It was just natural. Not having Konoha Ninja win Chunin exams occurring in Konoha was humiliating enough. If no Konoha Ninja got past the first match of the finals, what message would that send to the future potential clients? Still, that didn't mean she had to state the reality so bluntly. Some secrets should stay discreet even if everybody knows them. She is definitely pissed. Pakura inwardly noted with a small smile gracing her lips. She stayed quiet as the other Kages, not seeing the point in stirring up this particular conversation even if she could. With how the odds were stacked against Tsunade's village in these exams, nobody could fault her for giving the Konoha participants a bit of a push by matching them against someone they either had a chance to beat or could counter with their skill set. But even then she could not have been sure her participants would win. The competition was just that hard. Winning the whole thing? Tsunade could forget about that with people like Karen Uzumaki and Tamari participating, and she definitely knew it too. Hence, the uneven match UPS. She at least made sure to pit people of similar prowess against each other so the matches are not utter curb stomping. So far, in every match, both combatants had a chance to win. That would not have happened if someone like Hinata fought Teiwa, for example. The matchmaking was not that terrible. Honestly, the show of power to civilians was one of the best Chunin exams ever had. Granted, that was more because of the quality of the current contestants than anything else. Speaking of quality, the next match will be between Sabaku no Tamari and Karen Uzumaki. Hayate announced, and Pakura wryly smiled as she glanced at the smug-looking Tsunade. Of course, she just had to put the two strongest against each other. Shrewd shrew. Chapter 402, Womanly Spat. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. The two women walked into the arena and from the first moment, it was obvious the hostility in the air skyrocketed. Height shuddered as he suddenly found himself right in the middle of the two glaring and approaching women. He had no idea why it reminded him of Danzo's bloodlust when he once coughed right into his face by coincidence, but aren't they supposed to be genins? Why does their bloodlust match something a jonin would be capable of releasing? He inwardly sweat dropped and took a few subtle steps back to not be in their direct line of sight in fear they would start to fling jutsu at each other without him even starting the match. Fortunately for Height, neither Karen nor Temari had any intention of fighting outside of the official match, as they knew such behavior would not be appreciated by the, special few people among the audience they would not dare to piss off. Well, they certainly had the guts to annoy them if only a little bit, and neither liked the woman standing opposite them, so they didn't intend to pretend to be all buddy-buddy even though they knew it would have been preferred. The one to start the trouble was, as Rei expected, Temari. While Karen had a temper worthy of an Uzumaki, Temari's personality could be very provocative against those she both loved and didn't like. Just for both of those categories, she was provocative in a different way. Rei enjoyed and appreciated her provocative side, but he doubted Karen would feel the same way about it simply because of how Temari felt about Karen. If you have something to say it. Pipsqueak. Temari uttered with a grin, smugly staring at Karen, who silently glared at her in a very reserved manner for an Uzumaki. If a look could kill, Karen would have won the exams already. Seeing how much the redhead held herself back, Temari's grin widened. She knew exactly what would provoke the redhead enough to get her temper rolling. She raised her nose upward just enough that only a trained ninja could notice the gesture. But even to those observant enough, it would have meant nothing. For Karen, who knew Temari well, though. Karen grit her teeth as she saw the subtle condescending and gloating look in her opponent's eyes. She hated those teal eyes full of mockery. She hated it even more than the words Temari uttered. Considering that her temper would usually not be able to handle even those words without giving a very strong retort back. Karen had no way of holding her emotions at bay once she noticed Temari's expression. Just because you are a vulgar harlot that likes to spread her legs where they don't belong, doesn't mean I gotta be vocal about it. Karen shouted back in anger, baring her teeth at Temari with her hands balled into fists. She really thought she looked menacing, but half of the audience, mostly the male part, found her act very cute. The red-headed girl looked like an angry harmless ginger squirrel to them. Temari raised an eyebrow at Karen when she heard her words. It prompted her to cross her arms on her chest and smirk in victory. What do you care for whom I spread my legs? Just because I am able to get the man I want to pound me into the sheets, while you can't, is not a reason to be so pathetically unreasonable, she said, her tone laced with sweet derision. Temari had the time of her life taunting Karen, especially since she saw it was very effective because of how Karen's expression twisted. Karen angrily huffed, but she didn't refute Temari's words. The redhead was inwardly baffled that the Suna bitch was so blunt about it. It took quite a lot from Karen to prevent herself from flushing red from both immense rage and dumbstruck embarrassment as she heard Temari so brashly admitting about her love life in the middle of Konoha's arena. And she says it with such smugness? The bitch. Karen inwardly seethed as the flashes of the loathsome harlot in front of her having sex with the man she loved passed through her mind. Why couldn't it have been me? Grr. Of course, her reason for being angry was not really that Temari had sex with Rei. It was mostly that Karen didn't, and Temari loved to smugly remind her of that at every opportunity. After Karen did not react for a few seconds, Temari decided to throw another jab at her. At least you know how to listen to a reason and know when to be silent like a good girl. Who knew it could learn? Pipsqueak. Who are you calling Pipsqueak, you shitty bitch? Karen spoke, trembling in a cold rage. I will never know why he would choose you over me. Who knows how many other men you spread your legs for? What good could be some cheap bitch like you for? She sneered, her eyes gleaming with a desire to inflict severe harm on Temari. She couldn't wait for the match to start. Temari's grin instantly fell when she heard Karen's accusation. She didn't appreciate that one, and it was obvious from how severe her expression became. Oi, are you questioning my fidelity? She spoke with an ice-cold tone as her lips twisted into a frown. Wanna die before reaching a breedable age, kid. The atmosphere in the arena became extremely suffocating and the small breeze totally halted as the wind became stagnant. Exactly like a calm before the storm. While the civilian audience enjoyed the exchange of insults between the women, every experienced ninja felt as if sitting on needles. They knew what was to come as they could feel the disturbance in the chakra and the threat it carried. It was far from a pleasant feeling. Just because you are a few years older. Karen let out through her gritted teeth. She was squeezing her fists so hard, her sharp nails dug into her palms, driving blood and causing her to feel a painful sting. Just because she was still a kid, Rei always deflected her advances. How was it fair that he fucked Temari and not her? Karen wanted nothing more than to see the shithead who decided 15 being the age of majority in the elemental nation and tear him to shreds. She was a kunoichi. An adult? She was old enough to kill, so it should automatically mean she was old enough to give herself to the man she loved? No. Frankly, the pain helped her to prevent herself from leaping at Temari and smashing that bloated sand swine's face into a bloody mess. Who permitted her to spread her legs for Rei before her? Karen's chakra also exploded outwardly like a raging inferno as her thoughts became more and more turbulent. It was not visible for civilians, but the ninjas jolted at the abrupt flood of energy and malice. The bloodlust they could feel from the small redhead amplified to heights even experienced shinins were starting to feel unsure about their continued safety in the arena. Alas, one, Gecko Hayate, could only discreetly weep bitter tears as Hokage himself gave him the job of proctoring the matches. If he knew he would be caught in the middle of these two hostile torrents of chakra desiring nothing but to tear each other apart, he would have declined the honor and kept the heck away from the arena today. It was starting to be physically painful just to stay in the vicinity of their powerful chakra. Genins, his ass. Chapter 403, Temari vs Karen 1. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Hayate decided it would be unprofessional of him to delay the beginning of the match any longer when the combatants were in such high spirits. The match between Uzumaki Karen and Sabaku no Temari start. He exclaimed and jumped, not to the edge of the arena as during the previous matches, but he outright jumped out of the arena in fear of getting caught up in between the two outraged genins who could put most elite jonins to shame with the potency and volume of their chakra. What could a poor special jonin like him do against children like these? How was he supposed to proctor this match? Stopping it when they go overboard? Him? Really? With what army? Now I know why Lord Hokage looked at me with such a pity when he handed me this honor. Hayate bitterly thought with an inward sigh and outward cough. Oh well, it was no longer in his power to intervene. What should happen will happen no matter if he pointlessly puts his life on the line or not. That's why he decided he would rather keep his life and body intact. The two not genins could tear each other apart for all he cared. Down in the arena, the second Hayate started the match, both women moved. Temari fully opened her war fan in one swing, sending a gust of powerful wind at Karen while two chakra chains burst out of Karen's sleeves, snapping in Temari's direction. The gust of wind and chains, both supercharged on chakra, met in the middle, creating a powerful shockwave that dispelled the wind and deflected the chakra chains while forcing Temari to shield herself with her war fan and Karen to create an earth wall to avoid said shockwave reaching them. Because of the shockwave, the inside of the arena felt as if a ferocious storm was passing through it. The hair of both girls flailed wildly in the uncontrollable winds that sprang forth from the impacts of the shockwave with the walls of the arena. Cracks were left on every place the shockwave impacted a surface, and soon enough, the whole arena was covered in them. It was incredible to think only their chakra clashing could do this much damage to the environment. On the same note, the cages instantly realized a small problem. The women were far too strong for the restricted space of the arena. At this rate, the fight would surely spill out of it and the audience would be caught up in it. Fortunately for them and the unknowing civilians, Tsunade would not pit Karen against Temari in a place where they could massacre half the village just as collateral damage without sufficient preparation. Seals started to spread at breakneck speeds all over the cracked walls of the arena, visibly repairing them and covering them in a layer of chakra barrier. The barrier continued to spread until all walls were covered in it and a translucent dome was created above the arena to enclose the barrier. The amount of chakra funneled to this barrier surprised many ninjas, especially the foreign cages and Orochimaru. Konoha definitely did not possess anything like this during the last war, as they could see numerous ways of how to use such a barrier in a war, but Konoha never did. This barrier had enough chakra to withstand a Baijuodama. For some reason, that only hammered down their confidence in the upcoming invasion. Tsuchikage even started to regret his decision to join a pathetic snake like Orochimaru now. Once the shockwaves were over, Temari hoisted up her war fan and started to wildly swing it from left to right, sending chakra-enhanced wind slash after wind slash at Karen, hoping to catch her off guard because her visibility was impaired by the huge earth wall in front of her. Karen, however, didn't need her eyes to see, especially not when chakra was involved. Her mind's eye of Kagura warned her about the incoming attacks the second they left Temari's war fan. She put her palm on the back of her earth wall and focused, drawing a sequence of seals from her memory, inscribing it onto the wall with just her chakra. If the current seal masters saw a girl of her age doing this, they would puke blood, thinking their lifelong efforts were just a waste of time since even a small girl could replicate it. Temari's wind slashes splashed onto Karen's earth wall, but unlike Temari expected, they did not go through it like a knife through butter. Instead, their force was mostly deflected, sending the inside of the arena into yet another windy storm that increased in ferocity with each slash that hit Karen's wall. Deep gashes formed all around the ground in a show of just how much power each slash contained, and while some of these deflected slashes reached the walls, the chakra barrier held firmly, only slightly shaking from the impact. This utterly shocked Karen. Her enhancing seals were strong enough to nullify B-rank ninjutsu head-on. The fact they had to deflect Temari's attacks instead of nullifying them meant each slash contained power surpassing B-rank ninjutsu. Karen's smile uncomfortably twitched at that thought. Crazy bitch. She is really trying to kill me. Her smile widened, her red eyes gaining a gleeful malicious gleam. Hee, that just means I don't have to feel bad about going for the kill from the get-go. On the other side of the arena, Temari was having the time of her life. She didn't care if her attacks were deflected. Just spamming them on that red-headed banshee was enough to relieve her pent-up stress. Hit Karen could really become one of the best stress relief activities for her. The fact the arena was drowned in sharp screeching winds was really relaxing for her too. It didn't matter that the visibility was becoming worse and worse, or that her extremely trained hearing sense was becoming really irrelevant because of the winds. She felt at home in this environment and it only made her inner elation skyrocket. Suddenly, her relaxing daze was interrupted as multiple chakra chains burst from the ground around her, snapping in her direction with brutal precision, every single one of them aiming to pierce an instantly lethal place. Tamari remembered the red-headed brat was a powerful censor and frowned. It certainly complicated the matter. And here I thought I would be able to just relax and drown her in ranged attacks. Sigh, kids these days are troublesome. She distractedly lamented while twisting and spinning her body on her heels, just right to avoid the chains by inches. Her instincts and senses were trained to the extreme under Lady Pakara's tutelage. There was no way some Uzumaki upstart could kill her with such a pathetic attempt. Unknown to Tamari, Karen didn't aim to harm Tamari with her attack. The chains were all around Tamari. Because of their length, even if she avoided the attack of the sharp pointy end, their long body was still quite restricting to her movements. Tamari's eyes widened as she realized her area for evasion was shrinking. She clicked her tongue and reached for her fan with the intention to blast these pesky chains away. And that was what Karen waited for. Her chakra chains suddenly shifted, new chakra chains emerging from the body of her old chains in a similar fashion as Orochimaru's snakes burst out of his sleeves when he uses the formation of 10,000 snakes. A sense of danger invaded Tamari's mind as she found herself surrounded by sharp pointy ends of chains about to rush at her from all sides, and she didn't have enough time to reach for her war fan. The tomato brat hid her intentions well. Tamari grumpily thought, watching the threatening sharp chains approaching her body in slow motion. Even in her most absurd dreams she never thought Karen would be able to corner her like this. Author note, or rather rant, because I didn't do one for a very long time and I feel like nitpicking and I am also a bit bored, so I wonder what kind of response I will have for this. Lately, I noticed a few guys doing comments like, boring, or with similar meaning. I think I should address that. Laughing face. Feel free to express yourself if you find it boring. That's fine and I won't get offended. Actually, I am just amused by that kind of childishness. Look guys, we are at chapter 400th plus right now. If you feel the story bores you, just stop reading for a month and then read all chapters at once if you are still interested in it. If you are here, then I think at least something in my story kept you reading for the past 400 chapters. Going through that experience, you should have noticed that I am not talented enough to make every single one of my chapters exciting and interesting. I try, but I am sorry for being blunt, but in the end, I don't write for you. I write because I like it and have fun doing it. I write what I want to write, and if you don't find that exciting enough for you, then I am sorry, but this is the best I can provide. Nothing will change by typing boring into comments. If you feel the need to express yourself, at least give me a reason why you find it boring. Describe which part was rubbing you the wrong way, which interaction was not well done, what did you not like. Give me that feedback, smiley face. If you need to roast me alive, feel free to do so, but state a reason for it. That would actually make me happy. Boring is discouraging. I don't let it get to me too much. I had tons of people trash-talking me in comments and reviews, so something like that is not enough to get to me, but it still brings the mood down when reading it. Getting proper feedback on why you think it is boring and maybe how it could have been done better would be a different case. Nevertheless, some of my chapters will still be boring. No way to go around that. And that's because I don't have a precise plan in my mind while writing each chapter. I vaguely know where it is heading, but when I write a chapter, I write what comes to mind and what I find interesting. I write in a way I think would be interesting for me. In the end, I write for myself, and in order to get better at it. To be honest, sometimes I am flat out testing some stuff and people's reactions to them. Like purposefully doing certain things in the plot and then reading all the comments regarding them to know how they would be received. But my point is, this guy is no J.K. Rowling. Don't expect too much from me, please. Laughing face. Chapter 404, Tamari vs Karen 2. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Gritting her teeth, Tamari made a tough decision. It was either get hit by some chains and get her war fan or leave her fan and dodge. Naturally, her war fan would usually be the priority as it was an extremely important weapon for her, but she couldn't afford to be injured. Not by Karen. Not like this. Not so easily. Her pride was reeling in disgust at the thought. Plus, this fight would most likely be quite a long one, and whoever would get injured first would be at a huge disadvantage. Her course of action was set, and Tamari. The formation of chains tightened as they fully encased the place where Tamari was standing in a ball of chakra chains sharp enough to bisect a tree all over their length. To the audience, it seemed as if Karen managed to get Tamari with a finishing blow, as the ball of writhing chains, grinding against each other in all of their shredding might, was a very menacing sight. But Karen knew differently and stayed alert. Her sensing prowess caught something just before her chains struck. She was not certain what it meant, but she was not about to underestimate her foe. Her vigilance was rewarded 5 seconds later. The earth on the opposite side of the arena from the writhing ball of chains suddenly became sand, and Tamari emerged from it with a very put-off face. Part of it was definitely the fact she had to leave her fan behind, but Karen realized the biggest reason why she seemed so discontent was that she realized a sneak attack would not work because of how focused Karen was. To appear on the other side of the arena, her route definitely led underneath Karen, and that meant the opportunity for a sneak attack was definitely there. Now, if only Karen could find out how Tamari evaded her senses when she was underground. That was quite a worrying ability. Nevertheless, Karen couldn't help but give Tamari a quick smirk. She one-upped the uppity bitch so well, her ego's ass would hurt for ages. Seeing Karen's smirk, Tamari frowned. Yes, she lost her war fan, but what's with that winning expression? Why was the Uzumaki brat grinning like a loon? As if she had already won? Did nobody teach her the fight is not over until your opponent doesn't breathe anymore? This is why kids are so. Temari inwardly shook her head in exasperation. I can admit that was a well-planned assault. Temari started speaking towards Karen. But it looks like I will have to teach you an important lesson in the ninja world. She sighed. How you can be so self-assured at this point is beyond me. Did nobody ever tell you that? Temari paused and put her hand into her kunao pouch and took out a very harmless-looking storage scroll. Karen, who initially got on guard, looked at Temari in bewilderment. Storage scroll? That was it? Was she hiding a second war fan or something? That is the reason for her confidence? What could a storage scroll contain? Kunaos? Shurikens? Pfft, as if such tools were useful in a fight of this level. Giving a glance at her deadly chains, Karen could not believe the Suna harlot could still maintain that condescending look. I will really have to cut her up real good to wipe that smug facade off of her face, won't I? Karen narrowed her eyes and prepared herself. She refused to believe a second war fan is what made Temari so on top of her game despite her bad situation. Temari's smirk widened as she noticed Karen getting focused, expecting some grand attack she would have to dodge or block. Expect the unexpected. Temari leisurely said in a lecturing tone before she snorted and threw the scroll high into the air, right in the middle of where they both stood. Karen blinked, resisting the urge to follow the scroll with her eyes. She was not impressed. Misdirection was the oldest thing in the books. Trying to use an ordinary storage scroll to get her attention away from her opponent? Ha! Karen was not impressed. Her eyes stayed firmly on Temari, giving her a deadpan look that conveyed, really? That's your big lesson? Bluffing. It seemed that Temari's ploy failed as she stood awkwardly rooted in her place, her lips twitching when Karen's eyes refused to let her out of their sight while the small scroll spun in the air, reaching higher and higher. Path. Karen dryly started. She was however interrupted midway when the scroll burst open and an entire ocean of sand emerged above the arena, starting to fall down like an inescapable crushing waterfall. And while Karen was too stunned to do anything, taken off guard pretty heavily, Temari just let out a pearl of laughter full of enjoyment and glee as her body seemingly turned to sand which then fell to the ground, forming a pile there. There was no time for Karen to react as the ocean of sand reached the ground, burying the arena alongside her in itself, creating a small desert of quicksand. The audience was utterly stunned at this usage of storage scroll. Many ninjas wondered what Temari intended to do with a storage scroll in this kind of fight, but nobody could even begin to guess that she stored a desert in it. In hindsight, having so much sand dropped on one's head would be indeed unpleasant. The people wondered if the redhead was even alive at this point. Being buried alive by sand weighing several tons at the very least, that gotta be lethal, no? After a few seconds, small tendrils of sand rose up from the new sandy ground, forming into a humanoid shape before they solidified, revealing Temari who kneeled down, putting her palms on the sand and chuckling. Surprise bitch. Sand waterfall imperial funeral, she exclaimed, and the sand underneath her compressed with such force. A crater was created on the surface of the sand dune, sending a cloud of sandy dust to fly upward, covering the arena. The sand dropped around 2 meters in height. That's how much it was compressed. The individual grains of sand were so close to each other, the sand surface was now as hard as a chakra-enhanced rock. When the ninjas in the audience saw that, they couldn't help but grimace while thinking, yep, there is no surviving that one. And while many were utterly bewildered, the Suna ninjas in particular couldn't help but get chills when they saw someone other than Gaara manipulating sand in this manner. Gaara's sand coffin was extremely well known in Tsunagakur. Seeing its upgraded version? Of course, the people old enough to remember Gaara's bloody childhood would not find it amusing that the technique got an upgrade. Temari slowly stood up, rolling her tense shoulders. This was it. She revealed her bloodline to the world. And damn if it wasn't such a drag. My body is so stiff. I shouldn't have channeled so much chakra through it into the sand. She loudly groaned, giving the compressed sandy ground a sheepish glance before uneasily muttering under her nose, was this a bit of an overkill? I would have saved the Uzumaki kid from being flattened if my attack was life-threatening. She tried to awkwardly comfort herself, but the uncertainty was blatantly obvious in her tone. Right. As she awkwardly stood in her place, hunched over from how weary her body was, Hayate stepped into the arena, deciding to end the match. In his opinion, there was no way the Uzumaki was still alive. This move could possibly flatten a few streets in a village. What a monster. He thought as he glanced at Temari about to call her victory while inwardly feeling a distaste for her because of killing her opponent. The W dash. But as he was about to say it, the sandy ground of the arena suddenly started to violently tremble as many cracks abruptly emerged all around it. It seemed Karen was not as dead as everybody thought. Chapter 405, Temari vs Karen 3. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. The sandy ground was violently shaking, the tremors spreading even to the walls of the arena beyond the chakra barrier since it was a dome and the ground was not covered. Suddenly, the ground underneath Temari became bloated, forming a massive sand dune, and it was ever so obvious an eruption was imminent. Temari furiously tried to pour more of her chakra into it, hardening and compressing it even further, but something was pressing against the dune from within, causing it to expand outward no matter how much Temari tried to suppress it. When she realized this tug of war would be eventually lost by her, Temari decided to stop trying to crush Karen's attempt at getting out of the sand. She could delay it, but whatever Karen was doing, it was working a bit too well. Temeri leaped back, landing on the side of the wall and crouching there in wait, mentally preparing herself for whatever was gonna pop up from the sand. She had no idea what Karen was doing, but whatever it was, it must be huge considering the counter-pressure it was able to exert against her chakra. Now that Temeri stopped suppressing Karen's attempt, the sand dune abruptly erupted as if a bomb had just gone off within it. Sand flew all around and dust clouds rose into the air before it was quickly dispersed by a huge gust of wind as a massive torso of a gigantic crimson samurai armor made of chakra violently tore itself out of the ground with a roaring blast. Anyone who knew what Susanoo was would instantly notice the incredible likeness to that technique. The only difference was, instead of forming it via the Mangekyo Sharinon, Karen used her own bloodline, her adamantine sealing chains, to create this construct according to the example Izumi showed her. Of course, Izumi would have never thought Karen could actually pull it off, but apparently, one should never underestimate a motivated Uzumaki. Despite that, it was very much a work in progress as it obviously lacked the lower part of its body. The gigantic chakra samurai armor suddenly stopped and zoomed in on Temeri. The atmosphere in the arena became still for a moment as if come before a storm. The moment dragged on and the time as if slowed down, but a few seconds later, a chakra chain sprouted from the armor's right hand like flames before it skillfully spun it like a whip, sending powerful gusts of wind all around the arena while aiming to completely devastate the place where Temeri was standing. Temeri's pupils shrank as she realized the chakra chain with the width of a room was just swung towards her at breakneck speeds. She reacted as if on autopilot and just barely managed to turn into the sand before the chain impacted her position. The chakra barrier clashed with the chakra chain, sending a loud booming sound followed by a massive shockwave into the surroundings. The barrier remained intact despite the brutal raw strength behind the blow, and because the arena was covered by it in its entirety, the shockwave had no way to escape. This caused the pressure from it to build up until the winds picked up and the grains of sand started to erratically fly in the air, creating a powerful sandstorm. Temeri's chakra only nudged that process a bit. Karen pulsed her chakra, controlling her chakra armor to spin the massive chakra chain it held around itself, creating another gust of wind, dispersing the sandstorm in an instant and revealing Temeri's position. Karen smirked at the wide-eyed Sunakunoichi and prepared to control her armor to strike again. Unfortunately for her, Temeri was not wide-eyed because she was caught completely off guard. She just couldn't believe how stupid the Uzumaki bint was to do this. Before Karen's crimson armor could brandish its massive chakra chain at Temeri again, the powerful winds created by Karen's previous swing rebounded on the barrier, engulfing the whole arena and picking up the sand upward to the air in yet another massive sandstorm, this time, one much more ferocious as the previous one. There was no need for Temeri to nudge this sandstorm with her chakra. Karen did all the work for her by being a mindless violent brute of an Uzumaki and thinking that punching a problem is the correct way to go. She clearly forgot they were in an enclosed space where the recoil of her swing will be rebounded right back at her in the form of strong winds. Temeri slipped from Karen's radar, letting her chakra seemingly disperse into the sand. This was a technique she previously used to pass unnoticed underneath Karen. With this sandstorm, there was no way Karen could locate her. Karen, realizing that Temeri again used whatever she was using to escape her senses, had a problem. She could not sense Temeri and she could not see shit through all the sand flying around, but she also couldn't just disperse the sandstorm as it would only create a stronger one. Not seeing any solution, Karen's temper started to get the better of her. To hell with it. She inwardly screamed and started to angrily fling her chakra chain around the arena in a tantrum, intending, well, more like hoping, to hit Temeri with her blind blows. Karen was furiously smashing and shattering every piece of the landscape around her immovable armor. Powerful blows rained all over the arena, creating untold devastation and mayhem. The sandstorm was continuously being blown away and reformed again and again, with each blow becoming stronger and stronger until there was nothing but sand everywhere. Karen was blind and she hated it. The sand was doing something to block her senses. It drove her sparse. The more she rampaged, the blinder she became, the more bothered by it she was. It was one vicious cycle. Many in the audience, civilians and ninjas alike, went deathly pale at the sight of such mindless violence perpetrated by a hulking mass of chakra of the size of Hokage Tower. So much so REI even regretted installing seals that allowed the audience to see what was happening despite all the visual obstacles such as the sandstorm. Karen was simply not giving any shit about appearances. She utterly wrecked everything around her with extreme prejudice, and the ninjas in the audience had their lives flashing in front of their eyes as they started picturing encountering that, during a war. The reluctance was almost palpable in the air. Both Reikage and Tsuchikage stared at the spectacle in mute horror, quickly abandoning their plans to deal with Uzushiagakur after they dealt with Konoha. The massive chakra construct was causing craters with every blow. Hills were created and then demolished in an instant as the powerful force of the chakra chain terraformed the landscape in a mindlessly casual flick. Yes, Reikage could punch strong enough to pulverize a small mountain, but not with such ease. Yes, Tsuchikage's potential for destruction far outstripped what he was seeing, but he could not use his dust release so casually. This large-scale destruction was visibly not taking any toll on the girl. She was not thinking where to strike next. She was just waving that chain of hers left and right, no technique or skill, just pure brute strength. And this was the result. She could go on and on, powering that chakra giant as if it was some kind of D-rank jutsu. Needless to say, both Raikage and Suchikage were scared out of their minds. Just imagining that crimson armor being in the middle of their village, it sent shivers down their spines. If nothing else, Karen unknowingly earned respect from two leaders. Without the chakra barrier surrounding the arena, the cages surmised there would be no arena left standing after that tantrum of hers. Frankly, there probably would not be half of Konoha left standing. The barrier soaked up all the shockwaves, which were much more devastating than the blows themselves. And while Karen was blindly rampaging, hoping to get out of her utterly mortifying situation, Temari was preparing her counterattack. The Uzumaki wanted to pull a giant made of chakra out of her ass? Well, there was only one response to that. Since she wanted a giant, she will get a giant? Temari's eyes gleamed with vicious light. And not just one but several? I am going to teach you some common sense, brat. Temari heatedly thought. She was trying to restrain herself for the sake of appearances, but since Karen wanted to go hardcore. Who told you to pull a village-ending move in a competition meant for genins? Ha, brat. Chapter 406, The Showdown of Giants. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. As Temari started to focus on using her next jutsu, the sandstorm in the arena suddenly halted because the sand in the air started to gather into three massive wriggling tendrils surrounding Karen. Even the ground level started somewhat decreasing as the sand from there also quickly crawled towards the base of the tendrils, causing the ground to literally move. Karen was delighted Temari stopped the sandstorm, as at least her vision was recovered and her chakra sensing was starting to be useful again, but she also realized these tendrils were a preparation for a huge attack. These tendrils were as high and thick as her chakra armor and she couldn't move the armor yet. She knew there was a big chance that demolishing them would start a new sandstorm, but Karen didn't really have any other option right now. That's why with massive disgruntlement, Karen controlled her crimson chakra chain to smash the tendril to her right. The tendril of sand burst like water from an abruptly shattered glass bottle, sand flying everywhere, filling the arena again. Karen didn't wait for her chain and directly punched the second tendril with her armor's free hand, bursting it into massive streams of falling sand too. By the time her punch was finished, her armor's other arm already controlled the momentum of the chakra chain, ready to swing it once more. But before she could destroy the last tendril, Karen became bewildered as the first one she destroyed started to quickly reform, sand being sucked into it from the surroundings as if it was a vacuum cleaner. Her momentary hesitation cost her a few seconds, and when she finally got past her shock, the second tendril was already halfway finished reforming. Karen understood that destroying the tendrils would not work and her eyes started to look for Temari. If attacking the jutsu did not work, then attacking the user was the only option. That was easier said than done, however, as even though Karen was one of the best sensors on the continent and she tried her utmost best to locate Temari, she still had a hard time. Unfortunately for her, Temari was already done with her preparation and gathered enough sand for the next part of her jutsu. The outer layer of three massive spinning sand tendrils burst outwardly, revealing three massive giants made of sand, every single one of them matching her armor's torso in size. Unlike Karen's chakra armor, these giants were not made of raw chakra, hence, Temari could make multiples with much less chakra cost than Karen had to spend only for the torso. The arena was becoming cramped since the gigantic construct's eye level reached almost the audience area. Considering how high this area was placed, it was a sight to behold. The three sand giants roared and burst into action, rushing at Karen with the intent to smack the hell out of her chakra construct. Karen's eyes widened as she scrambled to whip her chain at the one on the right, hitting him in the chest, and much to her shock, she did destroy the giant, but in just a moment it was once again in one piece, raring to rush at her again. The problem was, it took much more force than she planned for. Karen couldn't focus only on the giant on the right, however. Two more were trying to rush at her. She stopped the one on the left of her by grabbing him around his torso with her construct's free hand, holding the giant back as it uselessly flailed its arms around and occasionally smashing them against the surface of her chakra armor's arm. Alas, the giants in their full size being as big as the torso of her armor meant she had much longer reach with the arms of her armor, so the trapped sand giant couldn't reach her with its arms. The problem was the third sand giant, the one in front of her. Karen's armor ran out of hands. She first planned to smash the one on her right with her chain and then swing her chain at the one in front of her, but the surprising density of the giants prevented that. When her chain impacted the first giant, it didn't go clean through him as it should, but instead, the chain lost its velocity and fell to the ground. Gritting her teeth, Karen let go of the chain and it instantly started to dissipate as most of the chakra forming it started returning to Karen. With this new influx of chakra, a new arm sprouted from the armor's chest just as the giant in front of it was about to reach it. The arm grabbed the giant by its head and forced it down, plunging it to the ground, splattering it with sand as the head burst like a watermelon. Not done yet, the arm then balled its hand into a fist before starting to smash the giant's body into a pulp, not stopping even when it started to reform again and again and again. Karen hoped the reforming cost Temari a lot of chakra because of how fast it was. By the time she stopped the two giants, the one on her right was almost upon her and she tried to grab it with her right hand that no longer held a chain, but the giant ducked under it, leaping at Karen's torso and embracing it, most likely trying to tackle her to the ground. Karen's chakra armor was however much denser and heavier than the sand giant. It didn't budge even an inch. Karen reached with her armor's right hand again, grabbing the sand giant, and tried to pry him off of her torso, but his sand arms fused together behind her back and it refused to let go, squeezing her chakra armor with the ring of sand its arms and chest created. From an outside perspective, it looked as if the giants were children manhandled by an adult, but the more experienced shinobi knew that all jutsu cost chakra. It wasn't as simple as it seemed. And indeed, sweat was running down Karen's forehead as chakra was being sucked out of her system in large amounts. Holding 3 struggling sand giants down was no small feat, especially the one trying to squeeze her armor's torso was problematic, as creating counterpressure with chakra took a lot out of her. So this is her plan, huh? Tire me to death, Karen thought while focusing on regulating her breathing. Huh? She must have never faced an Uzumaki before. I am not losing an endurance fight, Tuba. The fight continued and the giants struggled to escape Karen's armor's hold while trying to sneak an attack or two in, while Karen had problems containing all 3 of them. Splitting her focus 3-way was quite a problem. So much so, she even dropped her attempts to locate Temari with her chakra sensing. Karen realized her mistake when the sand underneath the chakra armor suddenly sprang up, wrapping itself around her armor, trying to pull it down into the massive amount of quicksand that somehow appeared under it. Karen tried to pull her armor up by completely ignoring the sand giants and using her armor's 3 hands to support her armor's massive frame, but even the hands started to sink, only quickening the process of her being dragged down. While Karen was preoccupied with the 3 sand giants, Temari had time to leisurely set up her next move, so she made it a massive one. She ground the ground underneath the arena into more sand before turning it into quicksand. The chakra armor was massive and provided extreme protection, that much was true. Even S-rank jutsu would probably not be enough to penetrate it. But it was also heavy and big, but worst of all, immovable at this stage. It would have been ever so easy to pull it underground and then put pressure on it until Karen's chakra would not be able to support it. Especially with quicksand that pulled it down, the more it struggled. When Karen's massive chakra armor completely disappeared into the quicksand, leaving only a calm surface behind, Temari, who was crouching upside down on the ceiling of the chakra barrier, directly above the place where Karen's armor was sucked underground, took a deep calming breath. Her chakra reserves suffered quite a bit to pull this off, but it was worth it. This was definitely the end. Chapter 407, Explosion. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Temari wasn't aiming to kill Karen. Far from it. Karen was an S-rank ninja and something like this should not be able to kill her off. If it did, then she would have been just a waste of air. Temari's whole plan was based on the fact that the chakra armor took a lot of chakra out of Karen to stay active. The 3 sand giants were not only a distraction but also a means to gather intel and probe Karen's defenses. Finding out that putting pressure on a part of the armor meant Karen had to focus more and spend more chakra to reinforce that part was the reason for Temari's plan. The chakra armor seemed really menacing, but having this kind of obvious and massive weakness, it really was not a finished technique yet. What gave Karen the confidence to use it against her, Temari would never know. In short, underground, Karen's armor would be pressured from all sides, which would drain Karen's chakra at an extreme pace. Yet, she would be unable to drop the armor since she would be surrounded by Temari's sand. It should not take long for the girl to faint from chakra exhaustion. Temari vindictively thought as she sensed what was happening underground through her sand. It would have been so easy to squash the Uzumaki brat to a bloody mangled ball of broken bones and torn flesh, but no matter how much animosity was between them, Karen was still one of the ninjas from the village on the other side, and killing her would not make Rei happy, so Temari refrained from wringing that pathetic head of hers. Suddenly something underground shifted. Temari was not exactly seeing what was going on, rather, she was feeling it, not unlike a blind person trying to orient himself with touch. The difference was, Temari felt everything every grain of her sand was touching. It was a very cumbersome sensing technique that was useless most of the time, but Temari was proud of having it. It took her months to perfect, after all, and it was an incredibly efficient way to train her control over sand with her chakra. This time, however, it gave her the necessary warning of Karen's last vain attempt at resistance. Except, oi, 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 you ain't gonna blow the entire place up, are you? Temari frantically screamed in her mind when she realized the massive chakra underground started compressing and gaining intensity and density in a very similar way to the techniques of the explosive core of IWA. Temari, who was still crouching upside down on the ceiling of the dome made of chakra covering the arena, looked down with alarm and quickly started to prepare her defenses. Tendrils of sand abruptly sprang up from the ground, flowing through the air towards Temari before the sand started to form shield midair while hardening, compressing, and becoming enhanced with more and more chakra. This was just the first shield, and as the intensity of the underground chakra buildup increased, sweat started forming on Temari's forehead. Realizing just her sand shield would not be enough, she started to compress and quicken winds in front of the shield to provide a bit more resistance and partially scatter the force of the explosion before it could even reach her shield. This happened too fast. In fact, only 3 seconds passed since Karen started compressing her chakra, so Temari did not have much time to create countermeasures. The chakra buildup underground suddenly stopped, but Temari was not happy at all. The amount of chakra in it. The only warning the spectators got was a brief expansion of the sand surface before it burst and filled the entire arena with a deafening explosion as blinding white light flooded the chakra barrier. Many people in the audience were blinded by it and had to rub their eyes to recover their sight, while others tried to cover their ears because of the loud booming sound. Fortunately for them, REI's chakra barrier held, otherwise at least a half of Konoha would have been just a crater. Still, both Tsunade and REI started to be quite annoyed with how much they had to focus to prevent a massive earthquake from occurring again. Honestly, did the two women not understand this was supposed to be a fight between genins? What's with this village-destroying shit show? The explosion quickly reached Tamari's wind shield, blowing through it as if it didn't even exist and only slightly diminishing in intensity. It reached her sand shield, and the sand started to instantly turn the surface of it into a glass before it shattered due to the extreme heat the explosion carried. The sand shield held somewhat even though the explosion was getting through it layer by layer. By the time the sand shield was completely destroyed, the force of the explosion was greatly reduced and Tamari had a barrier made out of her chakra in front of her. She might not be extremely proficient in this kind of jutsu, but she wasn't just a one-trick pony who could only do wind jutsu and manipulate sand. Lady Pakura has beaten an entire repertoire of jutsu into her just in case she someday needed them. The force of the explosion met Tamari's hastily put chakra barrier, making it violently tremble. Alas, Tamari's chakra barrier was directly supplied by Tamari's chakra, and damn if it wasn't draining as heck, so the barrier was preserved even if only barely. Tamari successfully withstood the explosion that could level half of a village and didn't even get scratched. After all, getting a scratch from fighting Karen would have been embarrassing in her opinion. Of course, she completely ignored the fact she did not inflict even a scratch on Karen either. The blinding light started to clear out and the aftermath left many spectators in a daze. Where previously were dunes of sand, now only a massive crater spanning the whole surface of the arena remained. It wasn't a clean crater either. Its surface was filled with many jagged protrusions that seemed to be made of something similar to obsidian. The whole ground was black and shiny, so much so, a person could even see their reflection on it. The environment of the arena was rearranged for the third time during this fight alone. And in the middle of this crater, Karen was huffing and puffing, her hands on her knees as he tried to catch her breath. The reason for her survival was obvious as her whole body was covered by the human-sized version of her previously massive chakra armor. Now, it only covered her body, not unlike Ringo's lightning armor technique. Seeing it, Tamari's expression twisted into a grimace. The biggest weakness of Karen's chakra armor was its chakra consumption. Because of its huge size, the redhead had to supply an ungodly amount of chakra to keep it active. But now with size reduction, she could focus more of her chakra to strengthen its defenses, make the chakra more condensed, while also using much less chakra overall. Did I just help her to get a breakthrough in her jutsu? Tamari disgruntledly thought in deep displeasure as she flopped down from the ceiling of the chakra barrier onto the shiny black ground just a few feet away from the huffing Uzumaki. Karen grinned at Tamari through her heavy breathing. Heh, how did, you like it? Itch, she asked, causing Tamari's eye to twitch. Such a cheeky mouth when you are half dead on your feet. You really should learn some humility. Someone else might have killed you by now because of how annoying you are. Well, I guess that is a genetic defect of the Uzumaki bloodline so you can't really help it. Tamari retorted back in a condescending manner, knowing it would annoy Karen a lot. Contrary to Tamari's expectations, there was no explosion of temper. The Uzumaki was probably too exhausted for that. Karen just derisively snorted. You, are underestimating, me too much. She raised her gaze, her determined red eyes looking straight into Tamari's teal ones, causing them to widen when. Chapter 408, Special Kind of Fight. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Tamari felt the subtle surge of Karen's chakra as her eyes connected with Karen's, while the crimson armor around Karen started to dissipate. A surge that should have been impossible for the exhausted redhead to produce. As Karen's hard breathing started to quickly even out and she straightened her back, Tamari realized what happened and her expression became glum. So you actually have a brain, huh? You didn't just blow your whole chakra reserve up as I first thought. Karen's eye twitched as she heard that. What did the sand harlot think she was? Stupid? Of course not. She exasperatedly exclaimed, her tone sounding very wronged. I reabsorbed most of my chakra construct and only used for the explosion the remaining few percent that I wouldn't be able to take back into my chakra system. Remaining few percent, my ass. You had to use at least 60% of the chakra construct to create an explosion of that magnitude. Tamari rolled her eyes with a snort and Karen's eyes nervously shook, causing Tamari to knowingly smirk. She didn't need more confirmation that she was right. The Uzumaki redhead had at best 40% of her chakra reserves left. That was extremely good news for Tamari as she also spent a lot of her chakra to counter that explosion. It makes no difference. Karen sniffed, I still have many ways to beat you. Oh, do tell, kid. What fantastical move have you prepared for the little ol' me? Tamari provocatively asked as her battle fan appeared in her right hand with a small puff of smoke. She naturally retrieved it after summoning the sandstorm. After all, leaving her special weapon just lying around would not be very smart. Karen did not rise to the weak provocation of her opponent. Her lips spread into a small smile. I am an Uzumaki and there is one thing Uzumaki are very well known for but it always goes unnoticed compared to our fame for the sealing arts, huge vitality, and chakra reserves. Let me show you, the Uzumaki sword style. An exquisite katana abruptly appeared in her hand and a second later a crimson layer of chakra covered its surface, reinforcing it while Karen took a stance with her sword in front of her and her knees slightly bent in preparation to move in whichever direction necessary. Manifesting a full body armor with her current chakra reserves would have been wasteful. Karen learned her lesson from the previous exchange and she grudgingly admitted that Temeri was an extremely experienced kunoichi. Clearly, she had no qualms of making this a waiting game of who can last longer. Using an exhausting justice like that was not in Karen's best interest. That's why she opted to coat only her blade. Unfortunately for you, she slowly spoke, looking at Temeri with self-confidence, She didn't finish her sentence and instead instantly rushed at Temeri at breakneck speed, swinging her sword in a downward arc. Alas, Temeri expected it and blocked the slash with her closed fan, momentarily surprised at the force behind the attack, but it was nothing she could not withstand, even if it drove her feet into the ground enough to crack it. As for suddenly attacking being dishonorable, there was no honor among thieves and they were ninjas. Close enough. Karen quickly realized there was no way to overpower Temeri and decided to adjust her tactics. Slightly leaning the tip of her sword to the left alongside her body, she tried to use an Uzumaki sword technique where the user slid her blade alongside her opponent's weapon before fluidly executing a stab. Temeri noticed the slight adjustment of Karen's body, however, and thanks to her vast experience, she realized what the redhead tried to do. Inwardly clicking her tongue, she let go of her war fan just as Karen started her sword technique. Sliding one's blade against the opponent's weapon required the opponent to have a firm hold of his weapon. The second Temeri let go of her war fan, Karen's technique gained more momentum than it should have and Karen found herself involuntarily pulled forward without being able to stop. Her eyes barely managed to widen when Temeri's elbow brutally smashed into her face. Karen couldn't let that go unanswered. As her head was snapping backward with blood flowing from her nose, she let go of her katana, and with her now free hand, she punched Temeri in the kidney, causing her to grunt in pain as she leaned forward and gritted her teeth. Karen also used the momentum of Temeri's blow and didn't just try to stop the momentum of her head. Instead, she used it to rebound her head forward. Temeri, who was a bit distracted from the blow to the kidney, suddenly experienced Karen's forehead smashing into hers with a loud thud followed by a surge of pain as her head bounced back, making her drop onto her ass. Karen was no different and also fell onto her posterior, wincing from the self-inflicted pain while her lips were curled in a gleeful vindictive smile. With the blood flowing from her nose, it was one disturbing sight. After the initial shock wore off, Temeri realized what just happened and reached up, touching her forehead before bringing her fingers in front of her eyes only to see her blood, making her expression shift into utter bewilderment. Did that bitch just headbutt me? She looked in disbelief at the groaning crane who held her forehead in her arms while lying 3 feet away from her. Realizing it really happened, Temeri was suddenly filled with seething anger and her expression twisted. Karen was slowly getting past her pounding headache while berating her past self for having such an amazing idea for a counterattack. Her head was throbbing as heck. But just as her mind was starting to become clear again, she was suddenly grabbed by her hair and her head was forcefully smashed into the ground. Her poor nose suffered yet again. Karen quickly reacted and hit her assailant who was behind her with her elbow into the area she assumed to be hips. Fortunately, it helped and her hair were let go. Karen groggily pushed herself away from her attacker while turning around. The world was swimming in front of her eyes and when she saw Temeri clutching her sides and glaring at her, Karen remembered she was still in the match against the Suna bitch. Fire flared in her eyes as she slowly stood up, Temeri mirroring her actions, both swaying from side to side as if drunk and disoriented, glaring at each other. Karen was a bit quicker, however, and was standing sooner than Temeri. She used it to her advantage and lunged at Temeri, her hands landing on Temeri's shoulders as she pushed her back onto the ground. The breath was completely taken from Temeri as her back impacted the ground when Karen used her whole weight to push her down. Her mind was still kinda sluggish, but when her lungs suddenly felt the impact and lost the air in them, her clarity momentarily returned and Karen was about to start delivering blows to Temeri when her head jerked to the side as Temeri's hand slapped her straight across her face, making her stop with her attempt at attacking Temeri from sheer astonishment. She let go of Temeri's shoulder with her right hand and put it on her reddening cheek, feeling the sharp sting as if to make sure she was really slapped. When her mind finally registered that she was not dreaming, her face twisted in rage, but letting go of Temeri's shoulder was stupid and Temeri used it to her advantage. As Karen's face twisted, Temeri's fist met Karen's nose, again. This made her topple over to the side as she clutched her face in pain as blood was pouring out of her nose. But as she was rolling over, Karen managed to get one last blow in and delivered a brutal axe kick with her heel, straight into Temeri's abdomen. Temeri spat saliva and blood as her stomach area received another blow. While Temeri was catching her breath, Karen raised herself on one knee, gasping for air, and noticed Temeri's hair bands were snapped and her hair were all over the place. Not one to miss such a sun-kissed opportunity, Karen took a handful of the blonde locks and pulled, very hard. Temeri gasped in pain as she felt her head being forcefully pulled back by her hair. Amidst her struggle, she noticed Karen's posture was not very stable and in an attempt to make her let go of her hair, she threw herself at Karen, making both of them tumble on the ground yet again, both groaning. This time the two girls recovered almost at the same time and started to exchange slaps, pulling each other's hair, and occasionally even delivering a punch or two while they rolled on the ground. Needless to say, the audience had a hard time believing what they were seeing. Rei was openly chuckling at Konan who had her eyes closed, unwilling to look at what was happening in the arena. Pakura in the cage box seemed like she wanted nothing more than to disappear into the thin air from embarrassment. This was not a fight between kunoichi. There was no finesse, no techniques. No, this was a bona fide catfight, and for some reason, REI found the situation exceedingly amusing. To think these two girls would start pulling each other's hair in front of all these foreign dignitaries and cages. Well, so much for Uzushio's and Suna's dignity. He chuckled while witnessing Karen trying to scratch Tamari's face with her nails as Tamari was trying to deliver yet another punch into Karen's face. Chapter 409, A Prelude to End. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. The catfight between Karen and Tamari lasted for 10 whole minutes when Tamari suddenly kicked Karen off of her, sending her flying back straight towards her discarded sword. When Karen noticed that, she didn't hesitate and retrieved her sword mid-flight before she dug her heels into the ground, sliding on it into a halt. She quickly regained her balance and sprang back towards Tamari, who was still unarmed because her war fan was laying on the ground a few tens of feet away. Chance. Karen inwardly thought with glee, preparing to slash at the sand bitch with her sword. Tamari's eyes widened when she realized what was happening. But she was not one of the best Suna had to offer for nothing. As Karen's blade neared her, Tamari crouched down onto the ground, her palms slamming into the black surface. With this one motion, she created a small opening in the black glass-like material, and instantly sand flowed through this opening, creating a wall in front of her. Karen scowled at such annoyance and just continued with her slash. As if a bit of sand could stop her, she pumped chakra into her blade before discharging it with a swing, sending a razor-sharp arc of chakra through the air. The air trembled from the force passing through it, and the sand wall was barely an obstacle as Karen's sword cut through it in a similar manner a knife cuts through half-melted butter. But it fulfilled its purpose. Even if it slowed Karen down just for a split of a second, it was enough for Tamari to escape. Especially since the sand wall obscured Karen's sight. Noticing her target was not split in half, Karen frowned. She expected this kind of result, but it still slightly disappointed her. She didn't need to look for Tamari. Karen may not be able to sense her, but she knew exactly where her opponent was. There was really only one direction in which Tamari could have fled. Karen looked at the ground and smirked. All according to the plan. She inwardly exclaimed in elation before raising her right foot and starting to fill it with chakra. The spectators suddenly felt a tremor as Karen slammed her foot onto the ground, causing spiderweb cracks to splinter the black obsidian-like surface of the arena all over the crater. The force of her stomp was aimed mostly downward, traveling through the ground with the intention to squash everything, and everyone, hiding in there. Karen might not have been Tsunade's apprentice, but after years of interacting with the Senju princess, the Uzumaki heiress learned a few things on her own. Even if Tsunade never really tried to teach the girl, Karen's chakra sensing was a tremendous advantage that could be utilized, not unlike the Uchiha clan's Sharinon. Naturally, Karen asked for Tsun's permission first, as she didn't want to be flattened into a pancake in case Tsunade took offense to her technique being copied. Unfortunately for Tamari, Tsunade indeed gave Karen this permission, and as such, when Tamari emerged from underground, she sported many new bruises and lacerations from the pressure exerted onto her body when she was hiding underground. She was honestly still in quite good shape, considering the force of Karen's stomp would have squashed an ordinary chunin into a paste. Tamari didn't mind her injuries, even though she felt annoyed that Karen got her good. What irked her far more was the fact her sand clones were destroyed, and with them, her ambush plan had to be scrapped. Clicking her tongue, Tamari outstretched her hand in the direction of her war fan, and it quickly flew into it, as if she just used telekinesis. It certainly impressed the audience and got many surprised exclamations, but it was far from the truth. In fact, this was all possible only thanks to Karen. Karen's stomp might have destroyed Tamari's sand clones, but it also created cracks in the black obsidian-like material covering the arena. Surprisingly enough, this material was quite hard to break, and the only source of sand Tamari had at hand was underneath it. Even for the almost useless sand wall, she actually had to make an opening in the black material. This was a massive problem for her, and that was the reason why she even went underground in the first place. After these cracks were made though, it was exceedingly easy to get some of her sand through them and make it grab her fan and throw it towards her. What's with that stupid face? Tamari mirthfully chuckled while she subtly prepared to both attack and defend with her fan at a moment's notice. You didn't really think some half-assed imitation could finish me off, did you? Karen, who was sourly looking at Tamari, scoffed. I hoped you would have enough human decency to drop dead from it, but I see you are too dumb to die. You flatter me. But, I wonder, are you so flat because of your big brain? Tamari grinned when Karen growled at her. For someone who just had a date with a meat grinder, you are quite chipper. Karen retorted. Are you sure you don't want to surrender? You still didn't manage to deliver any worthy hit on me, and yet, you look like a cheap prostitute from a war-torn country who just received a beating of her lifetime. To be honest, Karen had a point. Tamari was extremely disheveled, her messy hair free from their bindings and her clothes torn in multiple places while her skin sported various bruises. She was simply a mess. Tamari's amused expression did not cease despite the insult. Instead, she snorted, Bitch, please, stop bluffing. We both know it is you who should be nervous. You might have put some scratches on me, but it is me who has enough chakra to continue for a whole day while you are running very low right now. It is me who can just relax and wait for you to fall from exhaustion. Karen did not have a retort to that. Her expression twisted in distaste at the fact Tamari was aware of her circumstances. Karen tried her best to act as if nothing was burdening her, but Tamari noticed that she was pushing herself. That wasn't good. I wonder if you are fine, Karen-chan. Don't you want to take a break? Maybe an afternoon nap would do you some good. Tamari mocked in a tone full of laughter. She might have looked bad but she was completely fine in every way that mattered. Karen rolled her eyes and her sword started glowing with chakra again. Don't you worry your sand-filled noggin because of me. I will end it with the next attack. She lowered her gravity center and entered another sword stance, preparing for a big move. Tamari's smile fell at that and she also prepared herself. Yeah, no matter what, the next attack will end the match. Both of them coincidentally thought the same thing. For a moment, the time in the arena as if halted. Before the moment passed and Karen leaped forward, a massive and oppressive force of chakra emitted from her blade that hungrily rushed at Tamari whose war fan was vibrating with the chakra of the magnet release, unleashed in its full potential. The two weapons clashed and Chapter 410, Karen vs Tamari Finn. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. The two weapons clashed, butting their chakra reinforcements against each other, and the arena became a maelstrom of strong winds and chakra once again. The surroundings reverberated with a loud clang as the katana met the war fan as a cloud of dust rose into the air and was instantly sent spinning on top of the two women due to the generated winds, restricting the visibility. It barely lasted 3 seconds and the dust made at most one spin, when another burst of chakra passed through the arena, scattering the dust and revealing the result of the clash. Tamari stood above Karen's unmoving body, breathing hard as her expression showed a slightly bewildered discontent. To think you would run out of chakra so fast. Tamari amusedly jeered towards the unconscious girl. That's kinda hard to believe. I guess your ability was greatly over-exaggerated if you can't even regulate your chakra exertion to not be knocked out by your own technique. Her tone appeared to be mocking and condescending but in reality, she was hinting at something. But you know, she continued in a more serious manner but extremely slowly, drawing out every word, you should have never dash. She didn't manage to finish her sentence as the body in front of her poofed out of existence in a puff of smoke, causing Tamari's eyes to widen in surprise. At that same moment, Karen burst from the ground directly in front of Tamari, revealing that she used the previous clash to dig a tunnel in the ground for this surprise attack. But despite the situation, for some reason, Tamari's face did not lose its knowing smirk. Karen saw her opponent was surprised, which only made her determination grow as her fist neared Tamari's chin in an attempt for a one-hit knockout. When she planned this ambush, she knew Tamari would not have enough time to dodge this as long as she caught her off guard. The hard part was catching the Suna harlot off guard but she did it. Elation filled Karen and made her pump a bit more chakra into her fist than strictly necessary for a simple knockout, or house demolition. That elation didn't last long though. Karen's fist indeed found purchase on Tamari's chin, and for a split of a second, Karen thought she had won. Except, Tamari's head, instead of snapping back as it should be after receiving an uppercut to the chin, burst into the sand, making Karen's eyes widen in disbelieving shock. The redhead didn't have much time to contemplate where her plan went wrong. Tamari's headless body showed it was not just an ordinary sand clone when it morphed into the sand after losing its head, and instantly reformed into Tamari once again, in the best position for an attack. Before Karen even registered what was happening, Tamari was already mid-swing at Karen whose body was mid-air. To give Karen credit, she did try to send a chain from her back towards the ground in order to give herself an ability to maneuver out of this trap but it was just a panicked rash instinctual attempt. Despite the chain's speed, before it could even reach the ground, Tamari's fist smashed into Karen's chin, causing her head to slightly snap to the side and her eyes to become like saucers from mute astonishment, before she fainted just as gravity started to work on her body again, making her unconscious body flop into a heap on the ground. Tamari stayed vigilant even after Karen's body hit the ground. After all, she did just bait the redhead so there was no reason why the redhead could not try to bait her into a false sense of safety while pretending to be defeated too. But after there was no follow-up attack incoming and her senses did not register anything out of ordinary, Tamari partially relaxed. She looked at the unconscious Karen and chuckled, "Ha, you should have let me finish my advice, kid." She condescendingly grinned, "I wanted to say you should have never tried to ambush me from the underground. I can feel everything they're due to my sand, ya dolt." And when Hayate showed up in the arena and Karen's follow-up attack was still not coming, Tamari seemingly relaxed completely, now really assured of her victory. But only after she did that and no attack still arrived, did she finally accept that her opponent was out cold for real. Hayate quickly checked Karen, noting she was alive and just knocked out, which in his humble opinion was a miracle after this kind of fight. The girl did not even have a proper bruise on her body if he discounted the nasty one forming on her chin. His eyes couldn't help but to briefly roam the ruined interior of the arena. The previously flat grassy ground was now a deep crater full of a black jagged glass-like material. Grains of sand were everywhere, in the air, on the ground, just everywhere, and no semblance of nature survived the ferocious fight. There was not even a hint of the completely obliterated trees that were previously on the side of the arena. His eyes came back towards Karen and he inwardly exclaimed in astonishment, "And yet, she has only one bruise after all of that? What kind of monster?" No, he suddenly realized an important fact and his gaze snapped towards Tamari who was patiently waiting for him to finally proclaim her the winner. Noticing that Hayate looked at her, she raised her eyebrow at him. Honestly, she was quite fed up with the proctor. He seemed as if he just saw Kuabai glaring at him. She so wanted to yell at him less gaping, more proctoring, but she was a guest in a foreign village. It wouldn't do to be impolite in front of such a massive crowd. I wonder if the monster is the girl who has only one bruise after this kind of fight or the girl who managed to knock her out while really landing only one hit. Hey, gave Temari a sheepish look. Inside of this look, however, was hidden much deeper and searching once over, the kind every experienced ninja could use. He quickly assessed Temari's injuries, and came to a shocking discovery. The Suna Kunoichi's wounds were barely surface scratches. She outwardly looked like a mess but she was totally fine. Did she purposefully make herself look this way to lower the Uzumaki's guard? Heiei wondered as he proclaimed Temari the winner of this match. Either way, he decided the second he would see one of these girls on the opposite side during a mission, he would hightail it back to Konoha, saying screw the mission. He was sure many of his comrades felt the same after witnessing the spectacle of their fight. In the audience, Rei was shaking his head at Karen's hot-headed stupidity. Well, this was expected. Rei thought in deadpan. Digging underground tunnels towards the victory seems like an Uzumaki thing. Did she really think such a thing would work against someone like Temari? When she knew that for the sand release, Temari would have needed to be extremely proficient in earth release since she did not have Shikaku. He wryly smiled and peeked to the side at Konan whose eyes held stoic cold fury. I almost pity the girl. To make such a rookie mistake. Rei's lips twitched into an amused smirk. Not that I can admonish her. I did advise Temari to never use her earth jutsus in order to not be known for them since they were such a great hidden ace. Temari's gravity control was especially incredible. Alas, there was no way she would have used it in front of so many ninjas even if it meant losing against Karen. Showing it here would ruin the entire purpose of keeping it hidden for when she was in a pinch. But back to the silently seething Blunet next to him. Frankly, Karen losing the match didn't matter. The problem was the dumb manner in which she lost. That made Konan's vindictive side really activate, considering she was here as a representative of Uzushio. Karen was in for some seriously painful session of remedial training if Konan's look was any indication. Chapter 411, Reaction of Cages. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. And as the break between the matches started, Rei focused on keeping Konan's sullen ire at bay by cuddling and improving her mood with tender kisses. Unlike the fluffy mood between them, the cage box was silent as a grave after the cages witnessed the previous fight. Orochimaru had a hard time keeping himself from outwardly showing his orgasmic mood during the last fight, so right now, he was just silently enjoying the residual joy. The more power Temari showed, the more she unveiled the real prowess of the magnetic release, the more he regretted not proceeding with his original plan of assassinating the Kaze cage and impersonating her. Temari was a perfect vessel, powerful chakra, body in superb physical shape and extremely used to elemental ninjutsu, an incredible bloodline that, he had to admit, he underestimated quite a lot before witnessing to what heights it could reach in competent hands. She was the wet dream of any body-snatching madma dash, any civilized gentleman with a penchant to dabble in science. Oh, and the Uzumaki's girl show of recreating Uchiha Susanoo with her clan bloodline. That was pure gold. He almost moaned from elation when he saw that. Yes, it was unfinished and half-assed at this stage, but the girl basically proved it could be done. Orochimaru found it really hard to not drool at that sight. Wasn't this what he wished for since Danzo showed him the scroll holding the information on the secret evolution of Sharingan? The reason why the Uchiha clan was really feared by those strong enough to be in the know? If Susanoo could be replicated to this extent, what's to say other techniques like Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu could not be replicated either? This was the reason why he was so obsessed with ninjutsu. Breaking the notion of possibility with nothing but chakra alone? He needed this? Plans on how to kidnap these two girls started sprouting in his head like a weed. He didn't care about the power they showed in the arena. He was confident enough that with his superior intellect, he could come up with a plan to defeat them. He was not a Sunin for nothing. Needless to say, if Rei heard his thoughts, he would snort and say that his delusions knew no bounds. And while Orochimaru was reliving his boyish wet dream, the other cages were feeling quite troubled because of what they just witnessed. Shikaku gained a new understanding of why Tsunade put her foot down and decided to tweak the matchmaking to her own liking, not taking anyone's opinion into consideration. At first, he thought she just wanted to give herself better stakes at winning some bet, which, unknown to him, was the real reason, but now he could see that Tsunade's foresight was incredible. From the power levels he saw throughout the finals, the matchmaking was done incredibly well and people around the same level fought with each other. And considering there were monsters like the two last girls mixed up with lambs like the Konoha Genins, it was a miracle that no match had a massive curb stomping so far. Shikaku gained a newfound respect for Tsunade for managing to accomplish this feat. He didn't even want to imagine how he would have felt if Shikamaru was to face that Suna girl, Temari. That would have been a disaster. There was no way in Shikaku's mind that his lazy boy would be able to handle her. In that regard, he was extremely grateful to Tsunade. Frankly, Shikaku did not care that the two girls were definitely not Genin-level kunoichi. As long as Konoha did not come to harm, he could care less if they trashed the arena. He also didn't want to reprimand either Uzushio or Suna as both were allies of Konoha, but he was the host here and that position came with certain duties and the need to uphold an impartial image. That's why he turned to Pakura before lazily asking in a disinterested tone, Lady Kaze Cage, would you mind explaining why you sent someone far above Genin level to compete in these exams? Shikaku knew his question was utter bullshit because cages usually sent their strongest Genins to foreign villages Genin exam and these were seldom Genin level ninjas. but for the sake of appearances, he asked it, just to make sure that Tsuchikage and Reikage would feel much less threatened. Fortunately or unfortunately, Uzushio's representative was not in the cage box, so he did not need to ask for her intentions right now. Pakura amusedly raised her eyebrow at Shikaku as she quipped, "What are you talking about, Hokage? The girl is bona fide genin rank. I can't see what's the problem with her participating in this fine event," she exclaimed with feigned lack of understanding that fooled no one. But, so this is the angle you want to play it. Shikaku inwardly mused, thinking it smart. After all, as long as officially the girl was still a genin, there was nothing any of the other cages could openly do. Tamari's participation would be fair. Demoting your high-ranking ninja just to show off in Chunin exams, have you no shame, woman? Even we would not fall so low. Oniki gruffly grumbled under his nose, purposefully loud enough for others to hear. There was a reason why no cage ever did something similar to what Oniki just described. It would drag the village's reputation through the mud in the eyes of the potential clients. Funnily enough, normal people actually expected a degree of honor from ninjas because it gave them a sense of safety that the ninjas would not abandon them midway through the mission. That's why the villages strive to show a positive facade and avoid seeming deceptive during these kinds of events. The darkness should be left buried deep enough for the normal people to not discover it, after all. Demoting. Pakura smirked, "I think your brain no longer works so well in your old age, Tsuchikage. I have never demoted Tamari. She just didn't get a promotion yet." She finished innocently, and Oniki wanted to spit blood at the shamelessly smug woman. She basically in a roundabout way just admitted this was all planned, and while the Tsuchikage had a hard time keeping his blood pressure down due to the audacity of the Kaze cage, the Reikage grunted, "Humph. What else to expect from the woman who pretended to be dead for years before she walked into her former village, murdered her former cage, and took his place?" His tone was full of contempt, and Pakura's eyebrow twitched at his sentence. It was provocative enough to make even Ringo snap out of her thoughts and turn towards the conversation. The tension in the air increased, and Shikaku knew this was not going well. He was there to moderate these big shots and prevent them from starting a fight, but ain't they simply ignoring me? He inwardly groaned. This was why cages had to be extremely powerful ninjas. Without that, getting even basic respect from other cages was hard. Unfortunately, he was not in this category. As he pondered what to do, a voice resounded through the cage box, making him feel as if salvation came early. "Hey, I see you are still the same petty bastard, shit flinger." Tsunade jeered at Oniki before turning to Reikage, "And you should keep your mouth shut about being a deceitful piece of shit because that description fits you quite well too. Hyuga incident, remember?" She snorted and turned away, not even waiting for a reaction from him. "The matter is closed. Tamari's documents are all fine, and that's that. Now then, tell me, how did you like the show?" Tsunade grinned at the disgruntled and probably offended cages. She thought asking this would be interesting, and she was not left disappointed. Just. The first answer came from the least expected person. "Kukyuku, Tsunade-chan." Chapter 412, Tsunade's Chaos. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. "Kukyuku, Tsunade-chan, it was magnificent. I wonder what kind of coincidence allowed both Uzushio and Suna to gain geniuses like that at the same time." Orochimaru slyly chuckled in a calculated manner. His words instantly prompted a shift in the atmosphere as both Reikage and Tsuchikage realized a few important things now that they were pointed out so bluntly. There were no free lunches in their world, and geniuses did not fall from the sky, nor were they cabbages. For both Suna and Uzushio to gain these earth-shattering prodigies at the same time, now that was fishy as hell. Needless to say, the attention of everyone shifted towards Pakura. Even Tsunade and Ringo did not try to break the situation off, both taking sadistic pleasure from throwing Ringo under the bus like this. Pakura, however, did not even blink an eyelash at the sudden attention. She just leisurely leaned into her chair. "I can't speak for Uzushio, but Suna is just that good," she exclaimed in a prideful manner while smirking smugly. The people watching her gave her deadpan looks for that answer. "Oh, are we to expect more miracles like that from Tsunagakur?" Orochimaru slyly asked, completely ignoring the fact that Pakura's answer was basically a subtle way to blow off the topic. He didn't care if Suna was really just that good or if they had any new secret. He surmised he would know soon enough, as this discovery practically cemented his resolve to infiltrate Tsunagakur. While he definitely would not dare to go for Uzushio because of their strong ceiling defenses, after all, he spent the last few years sending spies into their village only for none to return. Suna was a different matter altogether. Orochimaru really didn't think he would have many problems getting in. Pakura chuckled at his question as she found amusement in his telling expression. Anybody who knew his modus operandi would guess what was going through his head, and Pakura was a bit wistful that the guy would not survive past today. She could certainly make use of his schemes as a group training exercise for Tsunagakur's chinins. "Miracles, Pakura mysteriously quipped while briefly glancing at Tsuchikage with a small mischievous smile. "I wonder if making an old man homeless could be called a miracle." She inwardly mused before she answered, "Nah, Tamari is special," and nonchalantly shrugged, too experienced in the kunoichi arts for her lie to be caught. Tamari, despite her bloodline, was not really all that special. What made her reach her current level was attention and tutelage from both Pakura and Rei as her teachers. Pakura taught the girl the basics and more intricate things kunoichi needed to know, while Rei polished Tamari's chakra natures, bloodline, and chakra control to an unprecedented degree. That was honestly all there was to it. Temari simply had the guts and determination to stick to their training, and her current level was the result. In short, it was definitely something they could replicate with someone else if they really wanted, and that person could take their training methods. In fact, Konan was making her own experiments with training others, and they were largely successful. After all, the number of S ranks in Uzushio attested to that. This fight between Karen and Temari? It could be taken as a measure of success between their two methods. Karen was mostly trained according to Konan's training method, while Temari was under Pakura's influence. Needless to say, it is obvious whose method is superior. Hehe. Pakura gleefully thought, happy with the result of this match. Temari was definitely in for a nice little bonus for her victory. If Rei knew what she was thinking, he would have shaken his head in exasperation. Obviously, it was his training that made Temari prevail. After all, she mostly used elemental jutsu and her bloodline, did she not? And while Pakura was on the moon for one-upping Konan in this way, the other cages took her word for Suna not having another genius. As suspicious as they were, geniuses were indeed not something common. They just could not believe Suna to have more than one of them. It simply didn't fit their common sense, and hence, such thought was subconsciously discarded. In this manner, the topic was concluded, much to Tsunade's and Ringo's dissatisfaction. They wanted to see Pakura sweat a little under the scrutiny of the cages, but it seemed the other cages were just pussies with limited mental capacity if they couldn't press her more. How utterly disappointing. They both thought in disgruntlement. Of course, Tsunade would not let her fun end like this. She did not put the effort into coming to the cage box during the break between the matches just to be stopped from witnessing a bit of chaos. And since the chaos would not happen on its own, she had to help it a little bit, no? So, old man Shitflinger, Tsunade addressed Oniki, who turned to her, not at all happy at her calling him that. He did not show it outwardly, however. Just as when Hiruzen called him that in the past, he once again put an unbothered facade and snorted at Tsunade as she continued. A little senbon using birdie told me that you and the old pedo snake had a small reunion. Wonder what that was about. She grinned, giving a side glance at Orochimaru. Orochimaru, Oniki, and A almost had a heart attack when they heard her mentioning this. Orochimaru almost involuntarily gave a signal to start the invasion because he thought they were exposed, but fortunately, his cold head prevailed, and when Tsunade's words fully registered, he realized she was just fishing for a reaction. There was no way Kin, because there was nobody else this senbon using birdie could be, would know about his plans. Realizing this, Orochimaru forcefully calmed down and donned a genial smile, ignoring how Oniki and A were subtly eyeing him. Couldn't they at least pretend to not be on edge? Damn muscle-headed idiot and paranoid old fool. Since the land of rice is close to the land of lightning and the land of earth, our villages recently entered talks about doing business together. It is only natural. But I guess something like diplomacy does not belong to your barbaric worldview, Suna-chan. I remember you prefer a punch-it-till-it-goes-away method of solving things. He calmly replied, his expression the perfect picture of amusement. Tsunade snickered at that. Oh, you have no idea. In fact, Konoha recently also decided to enter an alliance with Suna, Uzushio, and Kiri. What a coincidence, it. She childishly uttered, causing Shikako to facepalm. The second Orochimaru heard that, his calm smile fell, and his eyes involuntarily glanced at Pakura and Ringo, who observed him with calm amusement. The only thought that filled his head as he realized what that meant for his plans was, oh, fuck. Chapter 413, Provocation. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Even the Tsuchikage and Reikage completely stilled, utterly stupefied at the bomb Tsunade just dropped. There was not one person in the cage box who did not realize what this new alliance meant, and they couldn't believe Tsunade just bluntly admitted it with an innocent grin on her face. It was stuff like this that was deemed the highest grade secrets in the villages. People died to keep it secret, and here Tsunade was just leisurely revealing it without a care in the world. Orochimaru, Oniki, and A subconsciously thought her to be an idiot, but they were too shocked at the implications to really put much attention to Tsunade's foolishness. In their minds, by revealing this information, Tsunade completely decimated any chance for Uzushio, Kiri, Suna, and Konoha to gain the most out of their alliance. She ruined any chance at surprise attacks from multiple sides, as now, both A and Oniki will expect such a thing to happen in the future. Little did they know that Tsunade was very careful what she revealed, as the benefits of this alliance were already about to be reaped and there was no longer any need to keep it secret. They would no longer be able to react anyway. And while Oniki's and A's priority was their village, Orochimaru was furiously contemplating the impact this news would have on his invasion, and he didn't like the picture he was seeing. Alas, it was far too late to call it off. I guess I will just have to cut my losses and let the Tsuchikage and Reikage take the fall for me, Orochimaru thought in displeasure. The two cages were almost certainly bound to betray their little alliance anyway with how things were going. It would be better to cause some trouble for them now. As much as Orochimaru believed in himself, having only Otogakure against Uzushio, Konoha, Kiri, and Suna, he could admit they would have been outmatched. Roping in both Iwa and Kumo to his side in this conflict was indeed the best thing he could have done. They would be an excellent buffer for him. With these two cages participating in the invasion on his side, Orochimaru had the confidence to at the very least kill Sarutobi and cause some nice damage to Konoha before he orders a retreat in a code he forgot to mention to his Iwa and Kumo allies. How unfortunate for them. Now that he had it all figured out, Orochimaru's smile eased into a pleasant one as he looked at Tsunade. In that case, I congratulate you for your new alliance. It looks like Konoha's future is going to be bright. Seeing that Orochimaru was not gonna visibly freak out, Tsunade pouted in disappointment. She knew well enough that by bright he meant on flame, but she was not gonna call him out on that. Anko and that lazy bum tag-along of hers already returned and discreetly took the place of their shadow clones, which meant the surprise forces Orochimaru was counting on were no more. Tsunade decided to leave Orochimaru his delusions. He was pitiful enough as it was. Why thank you, she amicably exclaimed, her expression completely innocent as she delivered the next part. Konoha's future is indeed looking up now that you, Danzo, and Sarutobi are no longer in any leadership position. That actually made Orochimaru's eyebrows twitch. He hated being compared to Sarutobi and Tsunade knew it. That's why she did just that. The other cages, and even Shikako, were extremely surprised Tsunade had no qualms calling out Sarutobi like this in front of them. To throw dirt on one of the most iconic heroes of Konoha in front of the leaders of the enemy villages. Both Tsuchikige's and Reikige's opinions on Tsunade's intelligence only lowered and their tenseness relaxed. In their minds, Tsunade was no leadership material. She might have been the best medic in the world, but from what they were seeing, the woman was dumb as a rock. There was no need to worry. Their invasion was in no way compromised. The last Senju was just being her retarded self. And while the worries of the two started to dissipate, Shikako was throwing Tsund a look that basically screamed, "What are you doing?" Unfortunately for him, Tsunade totally ignored him, grinning at Pakura and Ringo, who were having the time of their life, enjoying the private joke between the three of them. They could plainly see how the two cages disregarded Tsunade because of her words. She was throwing blatant hints that something is wrong, and yet, they already made their opinion about her because of how set in their ways they were. Not for a second did they consider this to be a ploy. After all, Tsunade Senju was known to be an extremely straightforward woman who was blunt as a hammer. Looks like the day you defected was a real blessing for Konoha, Snake. Ringo decided to join the fray, lightheartedly making a jab at Orochimaru. The poor dude paled even more from the repressed anger, but they all knew he could not afford to make a scene. While he had diplomatic immunity to a degree, Odo was still just a minor and new village. As long as this banter didn't turn physical, Orochimaru could only sit tight and take their words while trying to give back his own retorts. And that's exactly what he tried to do. You would know. After all, you are my role model, mayor I. Becoming a rogue ninja scum and then returning to your village only to become its cage. Kirigaku's standards have really fallen if they allow their rogues to become their leaders nowadays. I wish Konoha was the same. Orochimaru wistfully sighed. But I wonder how you got so strong. From what I know, the Reikage, he glanced at defeated you with one punch when you met him for the first time. Your unit slaughtered the Kumo ninjas and killed his fiancée, I heard. He purposefully mentioned that incident and then watched how A's expression tightened alongside his fists. Such a poisonous tongue. Pakura interjected, gaining the attention of the others before Orochimaru successfully goaded the Reikage into doing something stupid too soon. This teasing was all in good fun, but REI would probably spank them silly if their little fun made the invasion start sooner than it was supposed to. Only an idiot would fall for a provocation like that. Pakura deadpanned, totally ignoring the fact that A seemed to have a hard time stopping himself from pouncing at Ringo now that he had the reason for his dislike of her blatantly thrown into his face. Of course, Pakura had to insult him in the process, which earned her a glare from the man too. Orochimaru amusedly chuckled at that. That's rich coming from the person who didn't see her cage sacrificing her in a Sudis mission to get himself rid of the competition. Then again, you also killed him, so your case is not all that much different from Amari. He casually pointed out, making Oniki loudly snort. Rogues becoming cages. The village founders would roll in their graves if they knew. Oniki grumbled, supporting Orochimaru's claim. The lines were clearly drawn at this point. Orochimaru, Oniki, and A on one side while Pakura, Ringo, and Tsunade on the other. It might have just been a small conversation during a break, but it clearly showcased what the future held for their villages. Or so the Reikage, Tsuchikage, and Otokage thought. Former rogue or not, what does it even matter? I made my village much better in 5 years than what you managed in a lifetime. Pakura retorted, making Oniki bristle much to her delight. At this point, Shikako felt as if life drained out of him. The atmosphere among the 4 other cages was so hostile, he wondered how there was still no fight among them. He knew there was no way for him to stop them, either verbally or physically. He was not strong enough to do so, and that also meant his word was not respected enough. So, he did the only thing he could. He pulled his secret move and started doing puppy eyes on Tsunade. Seeing how pitiful her Hokage was acting, Tsunade inwardly sighed. Well, I guess this has gone far enough for now. I'd be you, I would stop this dick measuring contest. We all know Orochimaru has none, and Reikage's massive body size is practically him overcompensating. As for Oniki, well, he is a dwarf in both the body and below the belt. Good for you, Shikako, you win. She mirthfully laughed while the 3 men whose manhood she just insulted glared at her. Not giving a shit, she continued, as fun as this was, I will be going. The last Uchiha's match will be starting soon. Bye. With that, Tsunade disappeared from the cage box, leaving 3 butthurt men behind and causing their focus to shift towards her, instead of trying to start a fight with Ringo and Pakura. Chapter 414, The Last Match. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. The break between the matches was almost over and yet the audience was still quiet and stunned from the previous match, barely paying attention to what was going on since the people were still trying to process the battle they had just seen. As the amazement started to slowly tick off, the people began to realize what match was going to follow and they couldn't help but grow even more excited. Most civilians in the audience were wondering what kind of impressive spectacle the next match would be. After all, it was now certain that one of the participants in the next match was none other than Sasuke Uchiha, Temari and Karen, Kimimaro and Teiuya. Sure, they were amazing but they were not Uchiha. They were unknown, without reputation, but the Uchiha clan's reputation was known far and wide, even among the civilians, and that's why the civilians expected the last Uchiha to be special, to surpass what they have seen so far, to wow them with his skill and prowess, to showcase his superior talent. The audience was indeed crazily excited about it. Many gambled money, betting on Uchiha winning the entire Chunin exams, some going even so far as to stake their livelihood on it just because of the fame of the Uchiha clan. Especially some wealthy businessmen tried to gain money like this because they had hired Uchihas in the past and had an inkling of the power of their bloodline. Many came to Konoha with the sole purpose of seeing the last scion of the Uchiha clan fight. Sasuke's story was well known even outside of Konoha and people were naturally curious about him. Many thought he would be just as talented as the infamous Itachi Uchiha and they wanted to see it. Unlike the ninjas who knew the two girls who previously fought were monsters, the civilians' expectations of Sasuke grew according to what they had already seen and they expected him to perform better. Much better. They expected him to showcase the superiority of the Uchihas. Even the daimyos who were currently watching expected a lot from this match. Since they were just kids, they were hearing from their nannies about the strength of old clans like Senju and Uchiha. That went especially for foreign cages who could not afford to underestimate these people. A fair bit of their early education was spent on how to treat ninjas, how to maintain their superior status in the face of someone who could kill them with a look. Naturally, their education brushed heavily on the past and the relationship between the ninja clans and their ancestors. And the name Uchiha came up a lot there. There was a saying Uchihas of old liked to spread as their motto of a sort during the Warring States era and every daimyo knew it. Only an Uchiha can beat an Uchiha. In a way, that came true when Itachi Uchiha slaughtered his own clan. After learning these kinds of things while growing up, these daimyos would naturally be curious about this last Uchiha and if he could fulfill the saying and had the potential to one day best the infamous Itachi. Poor Gaara, nobody paid him attention. Hayate appeared in the arena and announced the next match will be between Gaara and Sasuke. Nobody was surprised, considering these two were the last two remaining participants. Both Sasuke and Gaara took their time coming down to the arena, Sasuke because he was taught by Kakashi how to be cool, and Gaara because he had to deal with some pesky civilian thug idiots who thought he would not squash them because he was just a kid. He had no idea how these stupid idiots thought. They were literally watching a tournament full of superpowered kids trained to kill others and they still thought they could go and try to kill one when they had no chakra, because they were grown ups? Ridiculous. As such, a few halls of Konoha's stadium were repainted red and meaty. Ahem, Lady Pakura would be so proud. When the two finally arrived at the arena, the audience went wild, loudly cheering for Sasuke. Alas, little Sasuke didn't dare to show an arrogant expression. He knew well that if Anko saw that, she would have beaten the arrogance out of him. Again. So, in his new humble self, Sasuke just smugly stared at Gaara in a provocative manner. Ahem, Anko would be so proud. Gaara stood with a dull expression as the cheer for his opponent washed all over him. His sleepy gaze trailed all over the stands, only seeing people going wild and wishing the best to the Uchiha. Sasuke suddenly shivered as he felt a chill passing through his spine. But then Gaara's eyes landed on Temari and Kankuro in the stands and his lips twitched into a small, almost unnoticeable smile when he saw his sister giving him a thumbs up with an encouraging smile and his brother Kankuro. Well, who cares about Kankuro? The subtle murderous intent permeating the arena eased considerably, making Hayate stop sweating bullets. The experienced ninja could not help but throw the Uchiha heir a pitying glance. There was a reason why ninjas used killing intent as a measuring stick for how dangerous one was. It was a projection of chakra so a civilian could have killed thousands with his own hands but he would not have strong killing intent. A ninja that killed thousands though, and the killing intent of the red-haired small kid was giving even Hayato creeps. Especially with how well the kid was hiding the intent. He doubted he would have picked up on it if he didn't stand so close. Let's get this over with. Sasuke interrupted Hayato's thoughts with his strong exclamation, condescending determination burning in his eyes. With a tired sigh, Hayato decided to just let the kids duke it out among themselves and promptly started the match. Sasuke intently looked at the board Gaara and smirked as his eyes turned red and 3 tomos started spinning in them. I'd advise you to give up, kid. He bluntly stated, peering straight into Gaara's eyes. And if an illusion somehow ended up influencing Gaara, well, that would have been a total coincidence. Unlike Sasuke thought, the red-haired midget didn't succumb to the subtle nudging feeling of wanting to give up. Instead, the cork on his gourd came off and Sasuke's eyes widened as he saw sand starting to pour onto the ground and the scenes from the previous fight replayed in his mind. Then, Gaara's heavy killing intent hit him like a truck, Gaara no longer trying to conceal it and instead, mixing some of Shikaku's into it for the added effect. It was so sudden, Sasuke's mind didn't get enough time to deal with it and, okay, I give up. Sasuke exclaimed like a scared duckling. Before he even registered what was going on, Hayate called Gaara the winner, and Sasuke was left gaping at the red-haired midget who gave him a bored smirk. You are 100 years too early for mental warfare, boy. Gaara drawled before he sluggishly turned around and victoriously walked away. Chapter 415, Ambush. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. The entire arena fell into a deafening silence, both the ninjas and civilians bewildered beyond their wildest dreams. The match ended sooner than they could register and they were still excited, but there was no outlet for the excitement. As the seconds passed and the people started to realize what happened, the excitement slowly started turning into an outrage. People suddenly realized their chosen champion got his ass handed to him even without an exchange of blows. They realized their expectations were misplaced, and they couldn't accept that. Hence, the arena was instantly filled with the angry screams of the audience. Another part of the audience, the ones who bet on Sasuke winning, were currently sinking into despair as they realized they lost their bets. They thought this was a surefire way to earn themselves money. And yet, they could only pray that some intervention would happen that would render all bets null and void because quite a few of them just lost their years-long savings. The self-pity and despair slowly receded, leaving room for other emotional outlets and many chose anger, getting dragged into the flow of the angry audience, causing the volume of the enraged protests to only rise. And while the discontented people were showing their displeasure, Sasuke could just numbly walk out of the arena, his dismayed mind not even registering the shouts as he tried to come to terms with the fact he lost. One thing was for sure, Sasuke just gained a reputation that would haunt him his whole life. The situation in the cage box did not differ much from the outside. The only stark difference was the noise. The cage box was utterly silent. Despite the silence, the heaviness of the atmosphere was palpable. While Shikako was feeling quite embarrassed about how easily the last Uchiha lost, Pakura was smugly smirking. Orochimaru, however, was visibly seething, spreading a dark aura all around. The only reason why he even bothered to show up as Otokage was to have the best spot for witnessing his next vessel's prowess. He put an incredible amount of scheming and effort to be able to sit among the other cages without having to worry about being killed on the spot. He wanted to see Sasuke giving his all in the fight. He wanted to measure him, to compare him to Itachi, to see the boy's potential. Orochimaru gritted his teeth. And this is the result? A 5-second long match where his opponent uses mental coercion to make him surrender. He hissed. He didn't even know if he was angrier at Gaara for doing that or at Sasuke for falling for it. Because of how bewildered he was by the swift result of the match, he even forgot to signal the start of the invasion. He missed the best opportunity. In fact, that opportunity had been so great, it totally made even him stupefied. As he started calming down, Orochimaru noticed with the corner of his eyes that both Raikage and Tsuchikage were eyeing him in worry. The plan was for Orochimaru to give the first signal, but they both knew the signal should come after the last of the first matches. Realizing that his delay could cause severe problems among his ninjas who had no idea how to proceed. If some of his units decided to attack despite having no signal, the entire situation could get out of his control. Orochimaru decided to cut his losses and signal for the attack even though the surprise effect would not be exactly as high as he would have liked. Fortunately, the crowd was being quite rowdy, so that was playing in his favor. The second he flared his chakra in the before assigned way, several things happened at once. Firstly, Genjutsu covered the entire arena, and the hidden troops of Oto, Iwa, and Kumo that infiltrated the Chunin exams as foreign civilians quickly lost their disguises in order to recognize each other. Secondly, the area where daimyos sat, the same area where also Rei and Konan were seated, was engulfed in smoke as some of the guards turned up to be ninjas from Kumo and Iwa. These were mostly hiding as the guard units assigned to the Earth and Lightning daimyo, and these two daimyos knew a diplomatic headache was awaiting them if they survived this ordeal, while other guards promptly dropped to the ground with a dull thud, knocked out. Not even Orochimaru was crazy enough to start killing inside of the room full of daimyos. And even if he was, Oniki and A would have never agreed to such a thing, as it would shoot all of their village's credibility into a proverbial toilet. At most, they dared to take the daimyos as temporary hostages in the guise of protecting them from the invasion. The third thing that happened upon Orochimaru giving the attack order was for both Oniki and A to spring into action. Oniki dashed at Pakura, his hands already forming a cube of his dust release with the intent of deleting her out of existence, while A rushed at Ringo, his lightning armor flaring around him in a split of a second. Neither of them cared about honor and tried to go for the kill from the back, betting on surprising their targets. Unfortunately for them, Oniki's dust release hit the place where Pakura was sitting, vaporizing the entire area around it in an instant. But Oniki did not relax, as he didn't think it would be so easy, and this saved his life. Just a small moment later that would have been enough for him to relax after his attack if he had been careless. His senses alerted him of danger. Not even trying to locate where the attack was coming from, he ceased his gravity manipulation and let his body fall onto the ground just as a blade passed where his neck was a second ago. Worse yet, Oniki didn't have the leisure to land properly and landed on his back with what Pakura would deem a very satisfying crunch, causing him to yelp in pain and grit his teeth as cold sweat engulfed him when he realized how close he came to death. Unlike Oniki, A was not going for an overwhelming attack with the aim of erasing Ringo out of existence. Over the years, his resentment for her was only increasing, but he had no outlet for it since the woman herself was unreachable for him. That's why he went for a simple lightning chakra enhanced punch that should be able to knock the head of any Jonin straight off of his or her body. He just wanted to punch her far too much to do anything else. As his fist neared Ringo at speeds which not even Jonins would be able to see, much less react to, a spark of hope rose in A's chest. He had the bitch. But at the last moment, Ringo raised her hand, stopping his fist with just her finger coated with lightning chakra, making it obvious her lightning chakra manipulation far surpassed his, and looked at him with a bored expression. A's senses flared, but it was too late as he felt something he didn't feel in years. Not since he fought Ringo for the first time. Ringo disrupted his lightning armor by changing the frequency of the lightning chakra in it, but this time, she was skilled enough. A's lightning armor vanished, leaving him bewildered at the impossible feat, but he didn't get enough time to contemplate how Ringo managed it as he had to throw himself to the side in order to avoid a sharp lightning beam Ringo produced with her finger pointing at him. Their ambush was an utter failure. Chapter 416, A Chance. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. While A's and Oniki's attempt at taking out Pakura and Ringo right off the bat was failing hard, Orochimaru was about to use the distraction to deal Konoha a heavy blow. Namely, he was about to use Shikaku's surprise from the sudden attack at two cages inside of his home, to assassinate the man quickly. It was really just a trivial task to him. Orochimaru doubted it would have been hard to do so even if Shikaku paid full attention to him. Killing the reigning Hokage would have been a huge blow to Konoha. Maybe it was not on the same level as if he killed third Hokage while he was still in the office, considering Tsunade would be there to mitigate the worst of the consequences, but it would be felt, and that was honestly all Orochimaru cared about. He simply wanted to make Konoha in general suffer. And besides, nobody said he was leaving without killing the third Hokage anyway. But just as he was about to move in Shikaku's direction, a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Heh, you don't really learn no matter what, do you, Orokai?" Tsunade's voice resounded from behind him, causing him to freeze. He didn't know she was there until she spoke. It had to be said, he knew the woman for decades and Tsunade was never very good at the sneaky approach. Even Jiraiya was better than her in that, and the Toad Face was one of the loudest morons Orochimaru had the displeasure of knowing. To be sneaked upon by Tsunade like this, especially when he was always on alert against sudden sneak attacks, it blew Orochimaru's mind. Though, a major part of his utter bewilderment might have been the fact his lower legs were suddenly entangled by vines sprouting through the floor. Ma, how naughty Tsunade-chan. I heard you were capable of the wood release, but I dismissed it as baseless rumors. Orochimaru gleefully smiled, full of giddiness at discovering Tsunade really had wood release. His spies from Konoha indeed informed him that the last Senju learned the wood release, but when he first heard it he just scoffed at the notion. The information in the ninja world was always full of diversion, subterfuge, and flat-out lies to manipulate, cheat, or disorient the enemy. Hence, nobody could really trust every piece of rumor they came by. Something like the last Senju having the wood release was a pathetically old way of garnering interest. Orochimaru would know. He was one of the guys who were covertly spreading such rumors for Konoha during the Second World War, trying to make other nations send their strong ninjas after Tsunade's life with the aim of turning the tables on them during their ambush. It worked pretty well at that time, to be honest. Tsunade did use wood release in the past in front of an audience, but despite everything, Konoha was still a ninja village and people were at least semi-capable of keeping secrets. Unless she used wood release on a regular basis in front of other people, there was no way to confirm with any level of certainty if she really could or could not use it. Seeing that he was wrong and Tsunade really had the power of her bloodline did not make Orochimaru mad. In fact, it made him extremely happy. After all, despite being a medic, you never liked experimenting with people, did you? You never joined me on any of my projects for the village. Orochimaru said in a mock-hurt tone. A medic of your caliber would have been extremely convenient to have back then. A wistful sigh escaped his lips, just thinking about all the dismembered lab rats you could have put together for further testing for me. I have wasted so many of Konoha's prisoners to get some results because of not having your expertise at hand. He totally knew that talking about using humans as lab rats was one of the things that could rile Tsunade up. It also didn't hurt to remind her he was doing pretty much a very similar kind of research for Konoha, with Konoha's blessing as the research because of which he had to defect. The only difference was in the test subjects. One used Konoha's prisoners, basically ninjas from other nations, and the other used Konoha citizens. Orochimaru didn't see a difference. They were both human and bled the same, but apparently, Konoha's higher UPS disagreed and he had to pack his things and flee. The best thing that ever happened to him, really. While Orochimaru was trying to provoke her, Tsunade noticed she piqued his interest and smirked. The man, for all his good qualities when it came to ninja-style combat, had one massive weakness. He was easily sidetracked and prone to losing sight of his objective if something interesting in his opinion happened. That's why she showed him this minor wood release. With just that, Orochimaru forgot that Shikaku even existed. All the while, the man in question used the distraction to slink into the shadows and leave. Shikaku knew full well there was not much he could do in the upcoming conflict between 6-cage-level ninjas, so he did the smart thing and hightailed it out of there. Experiments. Tsunade mirthfully scoffed at him. Your lack of faith in me hurts, Orokai. I did not acquire my wood release by experimenting on others or with my genes. I'll have you know, it is wholly natural. Hearing such blatant bullshit made Orochimaru's smirk twitch. I heard about late bloomers, but the 60s is a bit too late for the awakening of a bloodline, Tsuna-chan. If you want to speak nonsense to me, at least make it a bit more believable. In Orikimura's opinion, there was no way Tsunade did not experiment with her genes. Her wood release was supposed to be too dormant to naturally awaken. He would know. He did many tests on her blood and flesh under the orders of both Sarutobi and Danzo and later with his own initiative. Tsunade ignored the second part of Orikimura's sentence because her focus was fully held by the first part. Nobody ever told you mentioning a lady's age is a sure way to piss her off. She frowned at him. You mean old lady's age? Orikimura smugly raised an eyebrow at her. Contrary to his expectations, however, Tsunade did not instantly swing her fist at his face. Much to his shock, she actually chuckled. I'll let you know that while you were cutting people apart, trying to find immortality in the bodies of below-average criminals or unlucky farmers, I have managed to reverse my aging, making my body physically in its prime while also slowing my aging to a near halt. Her tone was not full of bragging. Instead, she was speaking in a measured and light tone that showed she didn't put much importance on the matter. For her, it was not something to be proud of. It was just a normal everyday thing. Before Orikimura could do more than to slightly widen his eyes at the admission, Tsunade continued, her tone flipping into a condescending one. Funny that I only needed medical ninjutsu for that, huh? I guess I reached your goal of agelessness before you could even get a workable jutsu prototype that would not have a literal mountain of repercussions. It's your fixation on little boys, Orokai, that's clouding your judgment, you know. Before Orikimura could react, and he was visibly really starting to get annoyed at her, Tsunade decided to cut the talking short and reveal why she was here, but enough banter. I am not here to flatten you into the ground under my heel like I would a worm. I came to give you a chance. A chance, she says. Orikimura scoffed at her in distaste. He didn't like to be likened to a pedophile. Not at all. As if I would belie dash. A chance to fight Sarutobi. Tsunade increased the volume of her voice to interrupt the attempted interruption. When Orikimura's mind registered what he just heard, he stopped in his tracks and searched Tsunade's face for deception but, she is serious. He couldn't help but be stupefied. She really meant it. Chapter 417, Trap. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Orikimura stared at Tsunade, weighing his options. He could put some trust in her, do what she wants and go with her, or he could send her to hell because this was such an obvious trap it was pathetic. The problem was, it was working on him. For so long he wanted nothing but to show Sarutobi up. He didn't really hate Konoha in general. He hated Sarutobi, and hurting Konoha was the most direct way of revenge for forcing him to defect. Were his experiments over the top? Sure, he could admit that much. If he had succeeded, it would have set Konoha's might apart from every other nation. Just imagining an army full of wood release wielders. Konoha would have been able to conquer the continent. But these experiments were not all that different from what Sarutobi and Danzo had him doing for years up till that point. In fact, every village had something like that. They were ninja villages, and contrary to the perfect picture they portrayed for their gullible clients, being a ninja was a dirty business full of cruelty, ruthlessness, blood, and gore. Sarutobi knew that. Danzo knew that. Heck, even Jiraiya was fully aware of that fact despite his mind not being able to compute anything that didn't have to do with perversion. Orikimura would know. He saw how Sarutobi baited Jiraiya into learning sealing arts by showing him spying seals. Another thing that utterly pissed Orikimura and forever soured his feelings towards Konoha was when Minato became Hokage instead of him. Was him being completely left out of consideration for the Hokage seat reasonable? Orikimura did not think so. He was perfect Hokage material. Maybe he was a bit ruthless and cold, but he could make the village stronger and capable of protecting itself while advancing. But Sarutobi chose Minato over him just because Minato was all about puppy-eyed sunshine that did not have a capacity of thinking beyond serving his village. Did Minato's service in the Third Ninja War bring a lot of benefit to the village? Sure. But did him winning one battle in a very flashy manner outweigh decades of service, scientific advancements, and being a very skilled commander in 2 wars, never letting the enemy cross into Konoha territory despite being horribly outnumbered all the time? Orikimura would like to think that was not the case, and Sarutobi was simply biased against him. He had tons of other small reasons why he disliked Sarutobi too, and that was why this obvious bait worked so well on him. You know me too well. Orikimura whispered under his nose, showering Tsunade with searching looks. In the end, he sighed and raised his tone so his former teammate would hear him. Okay, what do you mean by that? Tsunade smirked at that. She deliberately worded it in a way that would appeal to Orikimura's more paranoid side, making him definitely think this was a trap. She simply wanted to see what he would do if she dangled in front of his nose something he wanted for so long. And he indeed did not disappoint. After only brief consideration, he jumped after this offered opportunity. Oh, he might not seem eager and his eyes held a lot of caution, but Tsunade knew him far too well. If he wasn't immensely interested, he would have never asked her to clarify. If he thought there was zero chance for this to be a genuine proposal, he would not even consider it. It's simple, really. I just offer you what I offered Sarutobi. Tsunade chuckled, a way to resolve this feud between you. A death match basically. She shrugged. To be fair, this was a very crafty way to gain benefit no matter in which way the situation would proceed. If Sarutobi died, she would lose one of the biggest opposing voices in Konoha, and if Orikimura died, Konoha would lose one of its more revenge-driven enemies that would simply not let go of their grudge just because Sarutobi was no longer in the office. In the end, she didn't really care which one of them would survive. She could take care of the remaining one at some other time. She mostly organized this for her own entertainment. And Sensei agreed to that. Orochimaru asked in utter shock. Tsunade shrugged. He thinks it is high time to correct a few of his mistakes. Orochimaru understood what Tsunade meant by that. Sarutobi apparently wanted to kill Orochimaru as he blamed himself for his defection and turned towards the dark path. That wasn't entirely correct. Sarutobi was only responsible for putting Orochimaru under Danzo's command, and the old war hawk showed him the ropes of the darker underbelly of Konoha, but that was beside the point. This turn of events made Orochimaru creepily chuckle at the irony. He. How very expected of our teacher, don't you agree, Tsunade? Indeed, how very hypocritical. She snorted and rolled her eyes, but who cares? Are you in or not? Orochimaru pursed his lips while seemingly pondering his options. It wouldn't have been like him to instantly agree, so he had to put up a bit of show. He had a reputation to uphold, after all. In the end, however, his choice was obvious. Fine. Lead the way, he eventually said in his usual manner. Tsunade didn't deem that with an answer. She just turned around, fully showing him her back as if baiting him, and walked towards the door leading out of the cage box. Orochimaru amusedly watched, wondering if she expected him to attack her, before he started following after her. As they walked, he realized they were heading towards the rooftops, where he ironically firstly planned to trap Sarutobi with the help of the Sound Four after baiting him there by kidnapping his grandson. Orochimaru wondered how could Tsunade be calm when the ninjas of Kumo, Iwa, and Oto were currently fighting Konoha's forces all around. She was the daimyo of Konoha, yet, she seemed to have no care in the world during a stroll through the battlefield-turned-arena, as if it didn't even matter. He supposed her reasons were similar to his. Explosions, screams, and cries resounded in the background, all noises they were both far too familiar with from their long service in Konoha's ranks. But still, he expected more worry for the village from Tsunade. Her body language basically betrayed that she didn't care, and that baffled Orochimaru. Their walk was silent as neither started a conversation. Whatever reason Tsunade had, Orochimaru didn't care, but he was glad for it. He had a lot of planning to do in his head. Facing Sarutobi, even in his old age, would be a hurdle. He knew that much. They eventually reached the rooftops, and when he saw lone Sarutobi already waiting for them, Orochimaru's worries fell. This was actually not a trap. Chapter 418, Orochimaru vs Sarutobi 1. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Upon seeing Tsunade and Orochimaru, Sarutobi, already geared up in his battle armor and holding transformed Inma, narrowed his eyes, and gravely spoke towards Orochimaru. So you have agreed, Orochimaru. I didn't expect you to have a shred of honor left, but here you are. Honor? No, sensei. That's something a ninja doesn't need. I agreed because this is simply the most efficient way to accomplish my goals. Orochimaru gleefully rebuked, enjoying how angry his words made Sarutobi. If that's the case, why attack Konoha? Why cause so much death and suffering in your home village? Sarutobi cried out, balling his fists in anger. He still had a hard time believing his student actually did this. Didn't he do a good job as a teacher to instill the love for Konoha in Orochimaru? Defected or not, Sarutobi never thought Orochimaru would ever attack Konoha directly. Not like this. Orochimaru, clearly enjoying Hiruzen's anger, just shrugged. It seemed fun. That made Sarutobi grit his teeth and turn to Tsunade as he hissed out, let's start the fight. Tsunade, a bit bored of the drama between them, just shrugged. If you are done talking. She beckoned them towards the central part of the roof that was surrounded by seals, leaving only a big area inside of them. Sarutobi confidently moved inside while Orochimaru gave an apprehensive and cautious glance at the seals. The only comforting thing was that Sarutobi was not bothered by them, so Tsunade would not place a kill switch into the seals with Sarutobi still inside of them just to kill him, would she? Orochimaru was uneasy, but he believed she was too sentimental and soft for that. No matter how disrespectful she seemed, Orochimaru thought she still valued Sarutobi as her teacher. When they both got inside, Tsunade kneeled down on the edge of the ceiling circle and put her palm onto a marked area. The seals instantly flared into life, glowing red before a barrier rose into the air, creating a massive restricted area where nobody could get in or out. Not unless they got through Tsunade first. The entire barrier was made by the example of the 4 violet flames formation that made a similar barrier but needed 4 people to power it up and keep it standing. Unlike that one, this barrier jutsu needed only 1 anchor and power bank, which was Tsunade, and despite her being that, she could still move around and fight, as long as she didn't leave the range of the chakra transmission between the seals on her palm and the ceiling barrier. There would be no Umbu getting in to help Sarutobi, nor would there be any unforeseen getaway chance for Orochimaru. REI went so far to ascertain that, he even added an anti-space feature so not even reverse summoning would work. Both Orochimaru and Sarutobi couldn't help but admire the barrier that sprang up around them. They were ninjas and adept at sealing for long enough time to recognize the danger of the barrier and partially unveil its functions with just a glance. They both instantly recognized its origin was from the Uzumaki sealing arts, the same as the chakra barrier around Konoha and the 4 violet flames formation. And while Orochimaru wondered when Konoha got stuff like this and how to steal it, Sarutobi wondered when Tsunade got stuff like this and how to, politically privatize it for his clan. Only when their eyes coincidentally met did they realize they were here to fight to the death, and not admire a new jutsu. That's how big ninjutsu nerds they both were. The atmosphere turned awkward for a second before both Sarutobi and Orochimaru wordlessly sprang forward at the same time, both trying to take advantage of the awkwardness of the other. Inma in his staff form met Kusanagi blade, sending sparks all around as Orochimaru and Sarutobi entered the contest of strength. Despite his age, Sarutobi still had an edge though. You were again slacking in training your body, old boy. He teasingly pointed out while trying to put more of his weight into his weapon. All those chemicals cannot be good for your health. You gotta be more youthful. Orochimaru inwardly cringed at that reference, imagining himself in green spandex and with a bowl haircut. Of course, Sarutobi instantly capitalized on that slight distraction and his leg shot up, only narrowly missing Orochimaru's crotch because he noticed it at the last moment and managed to shift his body to the left. That was cheap. Orochimaru exclaimed as he let Sarutobi win the weapon clash, all the while he leaned to the left with his entire body, letting Sarutobi's staff harmlessly pass him as his Kusanagi sword slashed downward, aiming to get a good chunk out of Sarutobi's leg. To Orochimaru's surprise, he managed to land a hit and cut off Sarutobi's leg right under his knee, only for Sarutobi to burst out of existence with a puff of smoke. Orochimaru's eyes widened as he felt heat abruptly rising from behind him. He didn't have enough time to look at it. Sarutobi was too expert of a caster for that. Orochimaru quickly spun on his heel, his hands blurring in hand signs mid-spin, and when he was finally facing the source of the heat and realized it was not just a fireball but actually a boiling sea of mud, he released the water wall jutsu. He was preparing to counter a fireball only for the water to be instantly suppressed by the far heavier mud while also being partly vaporized with a hiss due to the heat. Sarutobi watched as Orochimaru was engulfed by his boiling mud, but he didn't drop his guard. Orochimaru was a far too tricky opponent to do that. This time, it wasn't needed as Orochimaru did not intend to attack. He simply rose from the ground on the opposite side of the arena from Sarutobi and started talking while cleaning the dust from his shoulders. That was a good one. You almost got me. Using a shadow clone for distraction. I don't think I have ever seen you do that, sensei. And here I thought an old dog could not be taught new tricks. Sarutobi didn't expect to defeat Orochimaru with that move, but seeing him completely unharmed even though he managed to catch him off guard was a bit disheartening. Contrary to his feelings, his tone was grandfatherly and light. I was learning new tricks from Naruto, you see. Orochimaru felt his ego sting a bit when he heard he was almost hit by tactics made by that orange-clad fool. It definitely showed on his face as Sarutobi chuckled at him, causing him to blank out his expression. Mirth shining in his eyes, Sarutobi decided to verbally unbalance his opponent even more. But you are starting to monologue. Does that mean the warm-up round is done and you are finally prepared to unleash your trump card? Orochimaru almost stumbled and Sarutobi smirked. The brat was 100 years too early to try winning a trash talk match against him. He probably already forgot who taught him all his psychological tricks. Chapter 419, Orochimaru vs Sarutobi 2. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Indeed, it is time to stop with these small tricks. Orochimaru tried to appear nonchalant, but it was obvious he was not exactly comfortable. Sarutobi chuckled at his foolish disciple and his incessant need to always be in control of the situation. Then show me, what kind of sick technique is your trump card? He shouted with determination to defeat whatever it was, if only because he felt responsible and obligated to. Hearing that, Orochimaru's lips stretched in a nasty smile. He applauded his teacher's determination, but he also doubted Sarutobi had any idea what kind of trump card he had. If he knew, he would never wish for him to use it. Alas, Sarutobi's feelings were unimportant. In a way, Orochimaru learned this technique and picked his summoned targets mostly to spite Sarutobi. Very well, Sarutobi-sensei. I'll happily grant your request. Orochimaru playfully quipped with an undertone of excitement in his tone. His hands blurred in a set of hand seals Sarutobi instantly recognized, and his eyes widened in dread just as Orochimaru finished the necessary signs and proceeded to slam his palm onto the ground. Edo-tensei! Orochimaru exclaimed and Sarutobi's stomach sank. Sarutobi was one of the very few people who were old enough and close to the second Hokage to actually see the effect of this jutsu in the hands of its creator. Tobirama might not have been called the god of shinobi like his brother, but his power, especially when he used Edo-tensei, could not be disregarded. The scene of Iwa and Kumo ninjas being brought back to life only to be sent to fight their reluctant and horrified colleagues, friends, and family, slaughtering them without being able to control their bodies, only capable of weeping at their actions. It was a war then, and Sarutobi understood the need for such cruelty even when he was young. But that sight was also the reason why he marked Edo-tensei as a forbidden technique. If he had used it, the second and third ninja war would have been much easier for Konoha, and a lot fewer Konoha ninjas would have died, but Sarutobi always thought their sacrifice was not in vain. He would rather let them die all over again than for this technique to see the light of the day. That's why. What have you done? Sarutobi whispered in horror as 3 coffins started rising from the ground, marked by numbers 1, 2, and 4. It didn't take a genius to know what those numbers meant. Despite his utter disgust and profound disappointment, Sarutobi knew he could not let Orochimaru finish his technique. But he couldn't stop all 3 coffins. The decision of which one to stop came to him fairly easily. Contrary to popular belief, it was not the first god of shinobi, Hashirama Senju, who Sarutobi feared to be summoned the most. No, It was Minato Namikaze, and that's why Sarutobi quickly ran through the sequence of hand seals for counter-summoning Tobirama taught him during one of his private lessons, putting his full focus on stopping the fourth Hokage's coffin from emerging. The reason for this was very simple. Tobirama was the creator of this technique and Hashirama was both too powerful to be controlled and brother of Tobirama. Meaning, there was no way for Orochimaru to summon them in their full power unless he wanted to lose control. Sarutobi theorized Orochimaru would at best be able to bring them back with around low S-rank prowess. If he went for anything higher, Sarutobi would be overjoyed because that would mean both the first and the second Hokage would break free from his control and would be supremely pissed at his attempt to use them against Konoha like this. Minato, however, would be utterly at Orochimaru's mercy. I have to stop that at all costs, Sarutobi desperately thought. Just the idea of a man capable of slaughtering an army of 1,000 high-ranking ninjas on his own wreaking havoc inside of his beloved village made Sarutobi frantically despair at the possibility. He might be able to fight Minato, and surely even win in the end, but he was very aware there was no chance to do that before serious damage was done. And Sarutobi did not doubt even for a second that Orochimaru would order Minato to do exactly that. To destroy Konoha. After all, seeing his village demolished right in front of his eyes while being unable to do anything to stop it, that would make Sarutobi feel a lot of despair. When Tsunade saw what Orochimaru was attempting to do, her eyes twitched in irritation. But when she saw how Sarutobi reacted, she couldn't help but facepalm. Wasn't he supposed to know what using the dead demon-consuming seal meant for the user? There was no way Minato, who is still trapped in Shinigami's belly to be summoned, and yet the old coot is trying to prevent it. I swear the old monkey gets more and more senile the older he gets. Tsunade inwardly sighed and despondently watched her teacher waste his chakra like an idiot. And they call him Professor. She shook her head in exasperation. After a long struggle, Orochimaru lost the battle of wills and Sarutobi managed to prevent Minato's summoning, blissfully unaware that whether he succeeded or not, there would be no Minato showing up for this fight. In the meantime, however, both Tobirama and Hashirama stepped out of their coffins, looking around but unable to move as the chakra they had available was just a tad bit lower than what they would have needed to get free of the caster's control. Tsunade was using senjutsu so she could feel that and found it both hilarious and exasperating. Orochimaru definitely did not calculate how much chakra he could give them to retain control, so this entire situation going in his favor was one massive coincidence. No wonder I never won a gamble against him. He is practically shitting luck. She inwardly grumbled. Seeing the two summoned Hokages, Orochimaru smirked at Sarutobi, who was completely mortified he didn't prevent this disturbance to their eternal rest. No way was Orochimaru wasting this golden opportunity to taunt him. Kukyuko, what a touching reunion, isn't it, sensei? He gleefully said as he walked towards the unmoving Hokages, taking out a kunai with a control seal from his sleeve. Every move of his was deliberately slow in order to prolong Sarutobi's agony but also fast enough so there was no chance for his opponent to interrupt him. As he reached the two Hokages and was about to put the control seal into them, his elation reached the peak. This was it, the moment he waited for so long? The moment when he would make Sarutobi suffer as he watched the two biggest heroes of Konoha turned into his faithful puppets. It could have been much better if he didn't prevent Minato's resurrection, but oh well, two Hokages are better than none. Orochimaru nonchalantly thought, glee filling him. But just as the kunai were about to enter the two Senju ancestors, they suddenly got teleported outside of the arena before it could reach them. Both Sarutobi and Orochimaru's heads whipped in Tsunade's direction, only to find the last Senju glaring at them as if they just killed her puppy. Orochimaru gulped as he realized he totally forgot about the fact that the person with control over the seals around the arena was also a Senju. As for Sarutobi, he had no idea why he was being glared at. Tsunade grew increasingly more unreasonable by the year, so he assumed this was just yet another show of that. No way he did something wrong, right? Chapter 420, Family Reunion 1. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. I told you this will be a deathmatch between you two. As in 1 versus 1, Orochimaru. I know such a concept is hard for your treacherous mind, but I don't intend to let you break the rules I set. Tsunade spoke calmly with just a slight but obvious annoyance in her tone. Inwardly though, where did the shit-stain gain the guts to summon Hashirama and Tobirama with Edo Tensei right in front of her? She wanted to step in and pull his innards out of his stomach, enwrap them around his neck and strangle him with them, but this was Sarutobi's great moment, so she held herself back and just decided that Orochimaru was not walking alive out of here even if he won. Previously, she would have let him go while just secretly putting a tracking seal inside of him. The second he summoned her ancestors though, his life was forfeit. With her piece said, Tsunade turned around with an audible humph and left Orochimaru and Sarutobi dully staring at her back as she approached the still disoriented Tobirama and Hashirama. The atmosphere in the makeshift arena turned awkward as both Orochimaru and Sarutobi exchanged a sympathetic look full of understanding before they could stop themselves. Both instantly shook in disgust as they realized what they had just done, and the awkwardness turned to the more natural hostility and killing intent. Orochimaru might have lost his trump card, but he was not giving up now. If I can't use the Hokages to kill Sarutobi, I will just have to use my own hands, he spitefully thought. After all, he didn't summon the Hokages because he thought he needed them to defeat Sarutobi. He summoned them because he thought it would bring Sarutobi anguish. Just because they were taken away didn't mean Orochimaru would be unable to go blow for blow with such an old senile coot as Sarutobi. Neither was Sarutobi giving up. Instead of dropping his guard due to his perceived advantage, he became even more cautious. He knew how devious Orochimaru was and doubted the boy had no other trump card stored up in his ass. Both again drew their weapons and rushed at each other before Inma met Kusanagi in yet another struggle for dominance. This time, a much more cautious one, as neither Orochimaru nor Sarutobi dared to go all out in fear of being outplayed by their opponent. A long battle of attrition and stamina started as medium and low-ranked techniques flew left and right throughout the arena, devastating the surroundings within the ceiling circle encompassing it. While Orochimaru and Sarutobi were having their fun, Tsunade arrived near the two still immobile Hokages. When Tobirama and Hashirama saw Tsunade, "Oi, brother, doesn't that hot blonde chick remind you of Mito? Why not try to flirt with her?" Hashirama spoke, thinking he was being quiet, and from Tobirama's face, it was ever so obvious that if he could, he would have facepalmed. God of Shinobi indeed. Tsunade's fond smile suddenly froze for a second. She would have never thought they would not recognize her, but it was a few decades after all. Nevertheless, her left eye twitched in annoyance and her lips stretched wider, getting past fond and entering the territory of nasty and devious as she grinned at the two, her eyes gleaming the same way when she caught Jiraiya trying to peek on her. Oh! Tobirama and Hashirama thought as their eyes widened when they spotted Tsunade pulling her arm back in preparation for a punch. Their instincts told them to dodge and they definitely tried, but they realized they couldn't move as they were still bound by the Edo Tensei, and their expressions became dumbstruck as the world entered a slow motion for the two reanimated corpses, and they could with a great reluctance clearly see Tsunade's first getting closer and closer, coated in a very concentrated chakra that became almost visible to the naked eye due to the sheer intensity of energy it contained. The punch seemed to be extremely slow from their perspective, but in reality, it was very fast. Before the two even managed to utter a sound, Tsunade's fist impacted the ground in front of them. The entire Konoha could witness and, more importantly, hear the resulting explosion as a dust cloud rose into the air above the Konoha's arena before instantly dispersing due to the shockwave that followed shortly after the first impact. This was accompanied by such a loud crash it stopped half of the fights going on throughout the village. Even Orochimaru and Sarutobi momentarily stopped and looked towards Tsunade, only to see half of the roof missing. Neither paid much attention to it though. Both knew Tsunade and this was nothing new. Violent tendencies and low self-control followed by property damage were her everyday modus operandi. Since there was nothing out of ordinary, the two just shrugged and continued their fight. Tsunade, with a self-righteous satisfaction, noted that both her grandfather and granduncle were disintegrated just as she aimed for. Because their bodies were made by the Edo Tensei technique, the two started to be quickly reconstructed in front of Tsunade. Definitely reminds me of Mito. Ha. Hashirama started to boisterously laugh, totally disregarding the fact he was disintegrated just a second ago. Hashirama, just shut up. Tobirama groaned. Don't you see we have more pressing matters? Huh? What could be more pressing than finally getting you a woman? Do you even realize you are already dead and still single? It's sad, Tobi. Hashirama boisterously exclaimed, and Tsunade had a hard time not chuckling. She could have sworn Tobirama actually blushed at that. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Hearing Hashirama, Tobirama's face twitched. I'll punch you. No, you won't. Neither of us can move. Tough luck. Hashirama grinned. Sage, just kill me again. Tobirama muttered. Just then the attention of the two men was attracted by the hot blonde chick who snorted at them. Why, grandfather, I would have never thought you were into incest. To think you would offer your own granddaughter to your brother. Then again, it is a known fact that Senjo and Uzumaki are related. Tsunade chuckled, watching as the jaws of the two reanimated men dropped and both unconsciously gave her a once-over. Not the kind of look a man gives a woman, but rather, the type a grandparent gives their grandchild after not seeing him or her for a long time. After a moment of stunned silence full of bewilderment, Hashirama was the first to regain himself. T.S. Tsuna? Is that you? You grew up. He eagerly exclaimed with wide eyes full of shining stars that made Tsunade want to take a step back. Oi, calm down. You are scaring her. Tobirama rebuked. Besides, she is right. You just offered her to me. Creep. He snarked in deadpan. Wadash. Hashirama blinked before furrowing his eyebrows. His expression suddenly turned sharp. Oh, no. You are not getting anywhere near my sweet Tsu-chan, Tobirama. Even if it would mean you dying a virgin, I forbid it. I am already dead. Tobirama retorted, and I am not a virgin. But then he noticed Hashirama was too engrossed in observing Tsunade in fascination to listen to him, and he is no longer listening to me. Typical. He tiredly sighed. If he could, he would have shaken his head at his brother's antics. As funny as this little conversation of yours is, I am already taken. Tsunade said and showed them the ring on her finger, knowing only something like this would stop them from bickering like children. Silence instantly fell onto the two of them as they looked at each other. As the satisfied Tsunade was about to start talking again, the two spoke at the same time, threat gleaming in their determined eyes. Who is the dead meat? Chapter 421, Family Reunion 2. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. I think we have much more important things to do than you giving my decade-long husband a shovel talk. Tsunade dryly deadpanned. Inwardly though, she really wanted to deflect that particular topic. Having her grandfather and granduncle trying to intimidate REI would be extremely embarrassing for her. It had to be avoided at all costs since it would give her sister wives ammunition to laugh at her for months. Speaking of which, I don't think neither of these two would appreciate the fact I am not Rei's only wife. I can already imagine grandfather being his hasty self and trying to beat some manners into Rei for being a womanizer while granduncle tries to stare him to death. Tsunade's sweat dropped and her determination to delay their meeting with Rei, preferably until never, increased. She is right, Hashirama. Tobirama, bless his heart, decided to switch back into his serious self. They were both extremely gifted sensors with loads of experience, so there was no way the war raging in the middle of Konoha could escape their senses. In fact, Tsunade noticed Tobirama's finger slightly twitch while he joked around with Hashirama. He no doubt wanted nothing more than to go and defend the village. The only reason why he was still here was probably the hold Orochimaru's Edo Tensei had over him and his experience. As an experienced ninja, he knew that leaping blindly into a fight was just asking for trouble. Tobirama hoped Tsunade would provide more information on what was going on. That's why he steered the topic back to the ongoing invasion. Hearing him, Hashirama's face sank for a moment. His lifelong wish to prevent war by creating a village failed. This situation was the biggest proof of that. It lasted only for a second though, and before Tsunade could even blink, Hashirama's face hardened. Dreamer, he might have been, but he was first and foremost a ninja. And no matter how childishly he acted at times, nobody gets called God of Shinobi by being kind to people. Especially not his enemies. Seeing her ancestors being completely serious, Tsunade nodded in satisfaction before she started speaking. Konoha was just invaded by Orochimaru's dash. Wait, that pale skin and yellow eyes. Isn't that Orochimaru? Hashirama interrupted, faintly remembering small, 4-year-old Tsunade complaining about a genius in her class once or twice before he died. Suna-chan, what is your first crush doing, invading Konoha? He asked with genuine concern and curiosity shining in his eyes. Tsunade groaned and facepalmed as Tobirama chuckled. He too could remember how annoyed little Tsunade was that she was not first on this or that academy test. He was not my crush, Tsunade exclaimed, her embarrassment showing on her slightly pink cheeks as she glared at him. Hashirama grinned at her reaction but refrained from teasing her further. Her glare reminded him far too much of Mito, and that was one woman even the god of Shinobi did not want to piss off. It really warmed his dead heart to see his granddaughter all grown up like this. Are you sure? I distinctly remember Tobirama didn't have the natural filter only men married to an Uzumaki woman acquired, and so he decided to go for a slight tease at Tsunade's expense. He didn't get far as before he could finish that sentence. Tsunade's fist impacted the center of his face at speeds even he could not see, and his entire upper torso was blasted to smithereens. Yes, I am quite sure, Tsunade irritably exclaimed, and Hashirama winced. Yes, this was exactly the brutality of an Uzumaki woman. He would know, having Mito as a wife. Now that he thought about it, he actually pitied Tsunade's husband. When Tobirama finally reformed, Tsunade was not in the mood for more jokes, so she started explaining the situation. The invasion is not as bad as it might seem on the first look. In fact, it is merely a training exercise for our troops, Tsunade dismissively said, and both Tobirama and Hashirama couldn't help but to gape at that statement. Enemy ninjas were traversing the streets of Konoha and fighting was going on throughout the village. Where exactly did she get the gall to call it just a training exercise? Did the common sense get screwed while I was dead? Tobirama thought in shock. Mito, our granddaughter is not very smart. Sigh. I wonder whose genes spoiled her. Hashirama wistfully sighed. Tsunade could see on their faces that they thought something rude, but considering what she had just told them, she couldn't really blame them. Instead of doing what her impulses were telling her to and punching the hell out of them, she opted to do the patient thing and try to explain more. Just try to sense deeper, especially the chakra signature on each of the civilians. It should clear things up a bit, she said, knowing that at the very least her grandfather was skilled enough sensor to recognize what was going on if he really tried to sense deeper. Hashirama indeed did as Tsunade asked, and when he noticed what Tsunade was trying to point out, his eyes widened. You must have an excellent seal master at your side, to think such incredible shielding seals could be deployed to each civilian. Mito would have been totally dumbfounded. Ha ha ha. He started to boisterously laugh. His mood lightened and his worries eased. As somebody who had one of the best seal masters of his time as his wife, Hashirama could recognize seals just by the feeling of his sensory abilities. He could not perfectly tell what the seal did, but various seals had various feels and chakra had its potency. That's why he could tell these seals on civilians were meant to protect them, and what reassured him was the potency of the chakra infused into them. At least, the civilians in Konoha were totally safe. Tobirama didn't need an explanation. He was also a good sensor. He might not be on Hashirama's level, but with a bit of context due to his brother's previous sentence, he realized what was going on and he found himself giving Tsunade an approving look. Unlike Hashirama, Tobirama focused more on the readiness of Konoha's forces, and he could feel them all not only sporting similar seals, if only a bit weaker, but also moving in a coordinated fashion to counter the enemies. Konoha was clearly well prepared for this attack. My husband is the best seal maker in the world, Tsunade smugly proclaimed. As you can see, there is no need to worry about Konoha. You can go and help to fend off the invaders later if you want. Now, she turned towards Tobirama with a sardonic smile. I am sure you would like to see your student and talk about some of his exploits. Tobirama furrowed his eyebrows at her smile, not knowing what it meant, but she had a point. Since Konoha's defense was not such a pressing matter, he surmised seeing the young monkey would be a good thing. one of which he is currently fighting. Tsunade added with a dose of sarcasm, gesturing at the place where Orochimaru and Sarutobi were exchanging ninjutsu for ninjutsu. The ceiling barrier around them was quite strong, to contain their moves without disturbing Tsunade, Hashirama, and Tobirama who stood just a bit away from it. Tobirama almost face-faulted hearing that. He realized what Tsunade meant, realized he was summoned by Hiruzen's student. That would explain how somebody set against Konoha could use Edo Tensei. Tobirama thought and his eyes grew stormy. Hiruzen, just wait till I get my hands on you. I am gonna spank you till your butt cheeks fall off. I didn't entrust you with my worst and best jutsu for you to let it fall in enemies' hands. Tobirama felt immensely disappointed. At the same time, he was extremely surprised somebody actually managed to recreate it. The version he entrusted to Hiruzen when he was begging him to be taught was incomplete. Tobirama did teach him but he also knew Hiruzen was too dumb to finish the incomplete version. He always had a knack for nature manipulation but when it came to more esoteric ways of ninjutsu, like seals, space-time, and shadow clones, Hiruzen was average at best. Tobirama felt safe entrusting the unfinished version to him with the instructions to never let anybody see it. If nothing else, he could trust Hiruzen to never show it to anyone until he mastered it himself. Which was just not gonna happen. Seeing somebody capable of progressing the incomplete version to this degree was astonishing. Hearing that Hiruzen let a genius capable of doing this out of his sight, allowing him to defect the village, was downright outrageous. And seeing that this genius was not taken care of before he could threaten the village like this was the last drop. When he let Hiruzen become the third Hokage, he expected competency? Hashirama could see his brother's expression go blank and promptly took a step away from him. He knew his brother and somebody was in for a very rough beating. Tsunade just smirked. And he has no idea about all the problems with Konoha during Sarutobi's reign yet. Like, the extinction of the Senju line. She deviously thought. There was no way she would let go of this golden opportunity to make Sarutobi's life a bit harsher. Chapter 422, Tsunade's bragging. In Naruto, Reborn with talent. Well, then, let's go and take a look at Sarutobi's fight, shall we? Tsunade innocently smiled, not giving away how satisfied with how the situation was progressing. Unknown to her, Hashirama knew that smile very well from her younger days. He was both very impressed at how subtly she manipulated his brother and not impressed at all that she really did do it in this kind of manner. But, some things just never change, Hashirama inwardly chuckled, reminiscing about a similar, if a bit more innocent scene, between little Tsunade and Tobirama. She always knew how to justly acquire candies from her granduncle. As for Tobirama, he didn't notice. He was far too preoccupied with his own thoughts about his protege turned Hokage. Suna-chan, you do know we can't move our bodies, right? Hashirama decided to point out the obvious flaw in her plan. While they could speak and change expressions, maybe even do things like twitch fingers and such, the Edo Tensei restricted any bigger movements. After all, Tobirama usually used it on the village's zealous enemies so it had to have a feature to restrain them before the control seal could be implanted lest they attack the caster. That. Tsunade dismissively hummed before she flexed her chakra in a way that affected both Hashirama and Tobirama. The two men instantly felt the restriction on them shatter, causing them to be astonished. Tobirama's mind even momentarily forgot his anger at the feat his grandniece just accomplished. How? He quietly muttered under his nose in bewilderment. Tsunade, thanks to her senjutsu-enhanced senses, heard him and smirked. I might or might not have studied Sharingan a lot. She threw him a bone. Tobirama instantly froze when he heard her, his head snapping towards her and his eyes going wide. Oh, Tobirama dumbly said with a dumbstruck expression on his face. So you have realized that. He trailed off. Nevertheless, his chest was swelling with pride at Tsunade being so knowledgeable in ninjutsu. Tsunade saw that the conversation went over Hashirama's head and as a dutiful granddaughter, she decided to enlighten him. Looking at him, she spoke. There is a reason why Edo Tensei summons cannot be put down normally. Tobirama used a lot of the concepts of Uchiha's Izanaga technique in his Edo Tensei. Hearing Tsunade, Hashirama blinked and turned towards his brother, gaping at him. Didn't this dude hate the Uchihas the most? Why did he base his techniques on their bloodline? Tobirama just sheepishly smiled, not liking the awkward atmosphere surrounding him. This was exactly why he never confessed this fact to anybody. While bloodlines could not be fully replicated, nobody said one could not observe how they worked and learn a lot from it. Most Tobirama-made jutsu were on the esoteric side, yin side. The same as the Sharingan bloodline. He really believed to prevail over one's enemy, one had to study their prowess with impunity. This gave him a lot of insights into how Sharingan worked and gave him a lot of inspiration for jutsus. It was also because Tobirama studied Sharingan that he disliked the Uchiha clan. He simply understood their bloodline more than most Uchiha-born ninjas. And he didn't like the picture and the influence it had on the user. Not at all. That's why he always warned his brother about Uchihas being a loose cannon. I gotta say, granduncle, you really are ingenious. Tsunade continued without a care in the world. You not only managed to implement an Izanaga-like system into your technique but also bypass the only limitation of it. Since they are already dead and just chakra constructs of a sort, there is no permanent blindness associated with reformation for the summoned. She wistfully sighed and dreamily put her hand on her cheek. It almost reminds me of my research to evolve Mangekyo Sharingan to the next stage. Just a bit more simple. Tobirama and Hashirama almost face-faulted when they heard her. Mangdash. They started at the same time, stopping when they realized it. Looking at each other, they came to a silent understanding. Wadash. They again started at the same time. Apparently, they both had their own understanding of who was allowed to ask first. Getting annoyed, they decided to just speak. Both raised their voices and loudly exclaimed in outrage. Evolve Mangekyu Sharinon? Are you mad, Tsunade Senju? Surprisingly enough, it was Hashirama who was the louder one. While he didn't hold a grudge against the Uchiha clan and was quite accepting of them, he was, in the end, a Senju. He knew how dangerous that bloodline was and hearing of its final stage evolving, his world almost spun when he heard those words. Please tell me you failed. Tobirama almost pleadingly asked. Even the ninjutsu nerd inside of him couldn't make him want to see such monstrosity? Sure, Tsunade shrugged, I failed. Both Tobirama and Hashirama sighed in relief at that. If hearing a lie can ease your mind, I'd gladly supply one. Tsunade grinned at them. Both men looked at her in horror, but she didn't really care. Finally, someone listened to her bragging about her research and gave her a proper reaction. Whenever she talked about it to her sister wives or REI, they did listen but they were lackluster about it. Evolving Sharinon was no big deal for a guy who created his own dimension. Nor did it matter to a woman who had Kekiai Toda and could create the biggest spy network, spanning the entire elemental nations, just with her paper abilities. Nor was the carefree, sweet May interested in hearing about anything icky like science. Nor did Ringo care since genetics was not sword-making or swinging. The only person who listened to Tsunade gushing about her research was Pakura, and even then she rolled her eyes at her more often than not before she returned to her paperwork or other administrative duty. Tsunade lacked somebody who would give her a good reaction to her accomplishments. You succeeded. Hashirama swayed back. Who did you? Who is the? Who's Sharinon? I mean. Tobirama didn't even speak, he just looked deathly pale. Like a corpse. Ah, knock it off. Tsunade rolled her eyes at them, feeling smug to cause these two ninja idols to almost faint in front of her. I only allowed one of my friends to have the evolution of Sharinon. Friend? With Uchiha. Tobirama muttered in disbelief while inwardly musing, did I fail to educate her? Hashirama, however, beamed at Tsunade, his worries forgotten. Looks like my granddaughter is walking in my footsteps. He was delighted. The girl is a bit of a klutz but at worst, she will erase a mountain or two by coincidence. No biggie. Tsunade dismissively said. And the worries of the two men came instantly back. Konoha sure got a lot stronger, huh? Tobirama muttered, still not sure how to take such a powerful Uchiha being allowed to live. But he would give this Uchiha klutz the benefit of the doubt, for Tsunade's sake. Konoha. Tsunade furrowed her eyebrows at Tobirama, who tilted his head at her reaction. Did I say something wrong? Just. The Uchiha clan is no longer residing in Konoha, you know. Tsunade started. Chapter 423, Hard Truth. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Just. The Uchiha clan is no longer residing in Konoha, you know. Tsunade started. Both Hashirama and Tobirama felt as if a bucket of cold water was just poured on them when they heard that. Both for different reasons. Hashirama was bitter that this came to be. Konoha started with the Senju and the Uchiha clans and it should be continuing with them. He and his clan did so many sacrifices to keep it that way, to hear they were for naught was disheartening. Tobirama felt elated but also conflicted. On one hand, Uchiha-free Konoha was like a dream coming true for him. Finally, the ticking time bomb was away from his precious village. Whoever was responsible, Tobirama would love to congratulate them for being the biggest hero of Konoha. On the other hand, he felt very conflicted because Uchihas were not all bad. He had a student, Kagami Uchiha, who was a nice lad. Tobirama did not dislike individuals. Rather, he didn't like the risks that particular clan was bringing to the table. And in the end, the Uchiha clan was a part of Konoha's power. Losing them felt kind of sour for the second Hokage despite his personal feelings. When he was the Hokage, he always strived to keep them controlled but also to make them feel welcome in the village. He gave them the duty to police the village, after all. That was something every clan wanted and he relinquished it to Uchihas. What happened to them? Tobirama asked with a grunt, not even bothering to contemplate the possibility that they could have gone extinct. No way that was the case. In his opinion, Uchihas were like cockroaches. Tsunade thought for a second if she should tell them the truth or not. She was not sure if she wanted them to spend more than a few hours in the land of the living or not. If they stuck around, the truth would eventually come out and if not, it wouldn't have mattered. In the end, she just shrugged and decided to simply roll with it. Danzo and Sarutobi drove them over the edge so the clan head and some of his most arrogant ponces wanted to stage a coup. She purposefully trailed off, giving her flabbergasted ancestors time to think about her words. Now even Hashirama was getting a bit angry but he kept it in, not outwardly showing it. He worked so much, did so much, sacrificed so much, even went against their clan's rules as clan head and made quite a few of his clansmen dissatisfied with him, all to bring the end to the Senju and Uchiha feud, and all of that was undone by his supposed successor, the Hokage? What the hell? The knowledge that both of these men were Tobirama's students made it only worse. Sarutobi was his usual manipulative self and was purposefully pussyfooting around the issue, letting it grow bigger and bigger, building up the Uchiha's dissatisfaction with the village while Danzo flat out fed the flames behind the coup because he wanted some freshly harvested Sherry-non and the supply was kinda low at that time. Tsunade lightheartedly continued. Now, both Tobirama and Hashirama were battle-hardened veterans with kill count in hundreds, if not thousands, but their stomachs could not help but turn at how easily Tsunade was talking about harvesting parts of humans for their bloodline. For a clan ninjas, such a thing was disgusting. Tsunade was not disappointed and when she saw the twitches in her ancestors' expressions, she chuckled. In the end, Danzo went behind Sarutobi's back and tricked one immensely talented but very naive Uchiha kid genius into killing off his own clan. Elderly, children, babies, it didn't matter. They were all supposed to die. As talented and smart for his age as Itachi was, he was still a 13-year-old kid. Nobody could expect him to win in the manipulation department against old foxes like Sarutobi and Danzo. Still, Tsunade thought the notion that Konoha had to rely on one 13-year-old boy to deal with the Uchiha clan was ridiculous and she didn't understand why Itachi actually believed that. He had options. He could have gone to another clan for help. Maybe that would have made him indebted to that clan but, clans like Nara, Yamanaka, or Akimichi, would definitely help him without asking an exorbitant price for it. They simply were not dicks like Hyugas. At the very least, this way would have saved more Uchihas than just Itachi's brother. But like a kid without much knowledge about how these things worked and what options he had to resolve such a bad situation, Itachi chose to be a good boy and do what Danzo was telling him. It just shows that power is not really everything. Knowledge about your options is also a very important thing. Tsunade was about to continue but, so the Senju clan is the last remaining founding clan in Konoha, huh? That's kind of sad. Hashirama dejectedly said, his shoulders sagging in depression. Since her grandfather interrupted her like this and brought up a quite important point, Tsunade decided to omit how the Uchiha clan survived and relocated to the village of her husband. It would need a lot of explanations and she was not in the mood for that. She had no idea how accepting her ancestors would be of her decision to abandon Konoha for Rei, or about her usurping most of Hokage's privileges and becoming the daimyo of Konoha. Or, well, there was a lot that could not be to their liking. She'd rather direct them straight at Sarutobi's ass rather than deal with all of that right now. Senju clan is extinct. I am the last one. Tsunade bluntly told them. The things they were told up to now were shocking, but this was something that made them regret coming back to life. Something that hit them with enough force that if they had a working heart, they would get a heart attack. Both of them were ninjas from the Warring States era where the clan was above all. To hear said clan is extinct. Both Tobirama and Hashirama felt sick. But Nawaki? And the others? We intermarried a lot so. Hashirama spluttered, trying to deny what Tsunade was telling him while Tobirama just stared at her, silently observing her expression and when he didn't find any form of mischief or falseness, bitter acceptance and anger started to rise in him. Nawaka died in the Second Ninja War, grandfather. Konoha sent him on a mission close to enemy lines despite him being the last male Senju. Tsunade bitterly spoke, still feeling resentment for that. In hindsight, it should have been obvious to me. I only discovered what really happened decades later. While Hashirama was having a small mental breakdown at the knowledge his line was all but called out, Tobirama decided to retain his cold head and get some more information. And the others? As my idiot brother already said, we intermarried a lot. Despite mentioning that, he didn't have much hope. He didn't think Tsunade would disregard that fact. Checked blood tests. Tsunade shook her head. Danzo was thorough enough to have every single person with Senju blood meet some unfortunate accident. Tobirama's heart froze. Danzo, you want to tell me my student is responsible for the demise of my clan? He asked in an icy tone. It has to be said, he did not just teach his students how to survive in the turbulent ninja world. He basically raised them as his own. He gave them access to resources they would never be privy to. Even Hiruzen, who was a member of the Sarutobi clan, would never get enough teaching material to learn all 5 chakra natures without access to the Senju library. They were supposed to be far more than just students. They were practically family. An honorary Senju. To hear this, Tsunade sighed and nodded. As devious of her as this scene seemed, she was not really trying to manipulate them. This was something they had a right to know. As men who spend a massive part of their lives on bettering Konoha and serving their clan, they should be aware that their clan is considered extinct. Keeping it secret would not be mercy. That would have been cruelty. Don't worry about it. I have already made him suffer a very cruel fate for someone like him. Tsunade snorted. Both Hashirama and Tobirama wanted to protest but, they were dead. They guessed the future belonged to Tsunade now so they did not really have a justification to argue that point. The atmosphere turned a bit gloomy because of the topic and Tsunade had one massive bomb to drop on them yet. With a sigh, she decided to rip it off like a band-aid. That was the best approach when dealing with ninjas. But you can have your way with the other culprit of our clan's demise. Sarutobi is still alive. Chapter 424, Interrupted Match. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. Sarutobi is still alive. Sarutobi. Both Hashirama and Tobirama exclaimed in complete surprise. What do you mean by Sarutobi participating in? Tobirama started, cutting himself off before finishing. Sarutobi was his successor whose role was to safeguard Konoha and its clans. To hear he had a part in the Senju clan extinction. Tobirama's mood darkened and he became sullenly contemplative. Did I choose my successor wrong? Tobirama wondered as self-guilt started to flood his conscience. Should I have picked Kagami? Nobody would ever be able to answer that question for him. While Tobirama was pondering about his life choices, Hashirama felt a rare twinge of anger seep on the surface. He was usually a very jovial man with a capacity to forgive a lot, but this made him want to go and deal with the entire Sarutobi clan. Such was the justice and common sense of men raised in the Warring States era. As he usually did when such a situation arose, Hashirama pushed this impulse down, knowing it would not solve anything. This time, however, he was not about to let it go. What exactly was Sarutobi's part in that? Honestly, Tsunade wryly smiled. From a certain standpoint, you can't really blame him nor his advisors, granduncle's other students. They had no direct involvement. They just knew about it and allowed it to happen. For the good of Konoha, of course. She imitated Sarutobi's grave voice before snorting at the notion. It was easy for her to talk about these things. Decades passed since her clan perished and her new family helped her to deal with it. She wasn't really even an adult when most of her clan members died, so it had not that big of an impact on her. Yes, attending a funeral every other week was depressing, but the biggest and most rememberable impact on her had Noeka's death. Unlike her, however, Tobirama and Hashirama died when the clan was still going strong. For them, it was like being taken from a time when everything was alright and put into a time when one of the most important things in their life was simply gone. Tsunade's light-hearted manner of speaking and snarkiness did not carry the same humorous undertone for them as it did for her. In fact, it only fueled their anger. That's why Tsunade was utterly surprised when the two men just walked towards the ceiling barrier before turning towards her with an intense stare so similar to each other that there was no doubt they were brothers despite their ridiculously different hair coloring. The purpose of their stare couldn't be more obvious. They were as if demanding for her to open a passage for them. Sarutobi was almost a part of the family. To hear he just sat by and didn't even try to prevent the extinction of the Senju clan for his own selfish purposes. He might not have killed them with his own hands or orders, but in Tobirama's and Hashirama's opinions, what he did was bona fide betrayal regardless. They gave so much to the little shit and he couldn't even make sure their legacy would be preserved? It was such an outrageous thing they would normally question the truthfulness behind Tsunade's words. Alas, Hashirama's senjutsu could discern between lies and truth quite well, and his senses were telling him Tsunade was truthful to them. And since Hashirama looked so crushed, Tobirama also understood this was no distasteful joke. His very own students turned out to be utter scumbags. The only good one was the Uchiha, the one he kept at arm's length. What an irony. Seeing their demanding determination, Tsunade inwardly chuckled as she opened a small passage through the barrier, letting the two previous Hokages enter the arena where Sarutobi and Orochimaru were still locked in an intense ninjutsu battle. Orochimaru had a hard time. He was sweaty, panting, and under a lot of pressure as bullets of molten earth swished all around him. He, however, refused to break his calm and collected facade in front of his former teacher. The fact that Sarutobi was also heavily panting was the only highlight in his unpleasant situation for Orochimaru. He tried everything. He fought Sarutobi in a weapon fight, clashing his extremely poisonous blade with his teacher's indestructible staff. He only needed one goddamn cut to poison Sarutobi to death, but apparently, the old monkey was prepared and eager to fight. Hence, Orochimaru could not land even one glancing blow. It was extremely infuriating and frustrating. Orochimaru's ego actually wanted to sneer. When the weapon clashing led to nowhere, they started to use ninjutsu and the oldest trick in the book, deception. Orochimaru would love to think he returned as good as he received, and Sarutobi's disheveled appearance would certainly be a good proof of that, but that was only because Orochimaru had to use his special life-saving skin shedding 4 times already. In short, a prepared Sarutobi was an exceedingly difficult opponent. If there was no ceiling barrier around the arena, Orochimaru would have fled a long time ago. As crafty as he was, matching Sarutobi's pure firepower was proving to be quite demanding. Fortunately for him, the opening in the ceiling barrier proved to be just enough distraction for Sarutobi to stop his onslaught of jutsus. The old geezer still had more juice in the tank than his frail facade would suggest, and Orochimaru found that the hard way. Unfortunately for Orochimaru, he was not stupid enough to think he could use this opportunity to sneak attack Sarutobi. The opening Sarutobi showed as he slightly turned around was far too tempting and reeked of a newbie mistake. There was no way it was anything but bait. As Orochimaru turned towards the opening, he suddenly saw 2 utterly pissed senjus and instantly went deathly pale. He had enough problems with Sarutobi alone? Tsunade? You bitch? You said this was one-on-one. Orochimaru seethed while sweat was pouring down his forehead. He didn't want to die. He still had so many jutsus to research, so many people to cut open, so many bloodline users to experiment on. His journey for immortality could not end like this. Orochimaru was desperately looking for a way to run away, but the more he looked, the more he realized just how tight the ceiling barrier is. Not even the reverse summon seal responded, and that scared him witless. The last time he felt so powerless was when he fought against Hanzo the Salamander, and he at least had his teammates with him there. Unlike Orochimaru, Sarutobi felt relieved and smug. With Tobirama and Hashirama on his side, there was no way his slippery misbehaving student could run away. He of course did not fully trust Tsunade's barrier jutsu, so Orochimaru getting away was a real concern for him. But with 2 Hokages coming to help him, this will be your end, Orochimaru. Sarutobi thought with determination, intent to wash off the biggest mistake of his life that was currently staring at the two Hokages with fright in his eyes. Tobirama and Hashirama walked towards Sarutobi, intently staring at him. Hiruzen-Tobirama started. Sarutobi, however, did not want to give Orochimaru the time to prepare a counterattack and escape plan. Tobirama-sensei, we can talk later. Sarutobi interrupted Tobirama with urgency in his tone as he didn't let his eyes wander off of Orochimaru's body. Now we have to deal with my misguided student? You can't imagine what heinous deeds he dash. He didn't manage to finish his sentence. Tobirama had had enough, and right in front of Orochimaru's eyes, a sight that made his jaw drop in utter bewilderment had just happened. Tobirama grabbed Sarutobi's shoulder, instantly spreading restraining seals on him and immobilizing him. Sarutobi didn't even manage to widen his eyes in shock before he found himself bent over Tobirama's lap, and then the chakra-enhanced spanking began and Sarutobi's painful howls were heard all around Konoha. Orochimaru had to wince at every smack he witnessed and tighten his posterior when he saw how proficient and creative Tobirama was with the lighting chakra nature. Chapter 425, Hashirama vs Orochimaru. In Naruto, Reborn with Talent. While Sarutobi was getting spanked like a misbehaving unwanted child by pissed Tobirama, Orochimaru came face to face with an unamused Hashirama who had his arms crossed on his chest. You know, Hashirama started, I have no idea what problem you have with the foolish little monkey, but attacking Konoha is going one step too far. As he finished speaking, he unleashed the full brunt of his chakra's pressure upon Orochimaru, making his knees almost buckle. Only his long experience with life and death situations allowed Orochimaru to keep himself standing. His whole body, though, was slightly shivering from the passive killing intent Hashirama was releasing. It was not full of hostility and ill intent like Orochimaru's was. Instead, it was somehow filled with disinterest and annoyance, only making Orochimaru that much more pissed. If he was reading Hashirama's killing intent right, the man didn't even consider him a warm-up. Yet, whenever Orochimaru wanted to move, he would realize his body was fighting him. Is this the level of the first god of ninjas? It is nothing like Sarutobi. They are totally in a different league. Orochimaru was inwardly freaking out. Unfortunately for Orochimaru, as Tsunade removed the restrictions on Hashirama and Tobirama, their Edo Tensei forms regained their full power. In front of Orochimaru was now standing Hashirama, who could go one against one even with Kyuubi and easily have the upper hand. Sweat poured from Orochimaru's forehead, but the man still crazily smiled and playfully asked, "Why, are you gonna spank me too?" Hashirama's eyebrow twitched in a mild annoyance. That was gay. Hearing that, Orochimaru's jaw dropped in speechlessness. He expected many types of responses but not that one. The worst part was that he was utterly unable to refute him since he recently possessed a female body. It really made him wonder if there was no unexpected side effect to his possession technique. Whatever. Who am I to question your sexual orientation? Hashirama offhandedly shrugged and took a fighting stance. Orochimaru would usually throw a hurtful remark back, but with Hashirama focused on him, he could not let his concentration slip for some petty pre-fight trash talking. It actually saved him too. In a blink of an eye, Hashirama was upon him, his fist raising its path towards Orochimaru's abdomen with bone-shattering force, and Orochimaru only barely managed to twist out of its path thanks to how focused he was. But he didn't get enough time to rejoice because a split of a second later, Hashirama's second fist found purchase on Orochimaru's jaw, causing his body to be catapulted back before it bounced on a floor a few times and stopped in an unmoving heap. Hashirama definitely felt bones breaking upon his fist connecting, but this was supposed to be one of Konoha's brightest and strongest. No way did the fight finish with just that. He knew he went down into history as a naive idiot, especially for giving other nations their baijuyu, and he served his well-deserved Nomito couch time for that, but he was not that naive. Even his stunt with the baijuyu was in hopes of preventing a senseless war. He might have miscalculated human nature there, but it was not a decision made out of naivete. Cut the small tricks. He spoke towards the downed body of his opponent. Orochimaru did not get up. Instead, his body dissolved into the mud, causing Hashirama to lift his leg and stomp onto the ground with enough force that if the roof was not supported by the ceiling barrier, it would have crumbled down. Unfortunately for one Snake Sunin, that meant he was caught between the unmovable ceiling barrier and the full brunt of Hashirama's stomp, reminding him of his academy history lesson where he learned that the first Hokage was the best censor Konoha ever had. The force from the stomp pressed Orochimaru's body onto the barrier, squashing it so strongly blood flowed out of his mouth, eyes, and ears while multiple bones broke and muscles got mangled. Hashirama watched as his opponent was turned into a gory pulp, inwardly sighing. Not everyone could be Madara and withstand his strength head-on. Not even Tobirama could match him in taijutsu. But then something surprising happened. From the mouth of the mangled pulp, like a snake shedding its skin, another Orochimaru emerged and Hashirama had to prevent himself from retching. The dude was completely covered in stinking saliva? Where does he go for ideas for these kinds of jutsu? Did his teacher never teach him anything about propriety? Hashirama inwardly complained, taking a step back from the disgusting man. Somebody should have given him mental medical help a long time ago if this seems like a good technique to him. Tobirama, who was still inflicting untold atrocities upon Sarutobi's body by spanking him with various chakra natures, was actually quite impressed by the technique of Sarutobi's protege. Visuals aside, it was a masterpiece. Alas, it was apparent the technique was not yet finished, and even if it was, against his brother, it would be meaningless. Just as the new Orochimaru landed, he already had to swing his sword in order to prevent Hashirama from landing a blow on him. Or so he attempted to do. Hashirama was a bit more experienced than Orochimaru accounted for, though. Instead of dodging the sword slash, Hashirama caught Orochimaru's wrist and broke it in one fluid twisting motion. With this motion, the sword's path also twisted, and before Orochimaru could even register the pain from his now broken wrist, his very own sword impaled him right through the center of his chest, causing his eyes to go wide in disbelief. Hashirama relaxed his grip on Orochimaru's wrist, looking him straight into the eyes. "You are too slow," he said just as blood spurted out of Orochimaru's mouth, flowing down his chin. The skin-shedding technique was no magic. It was a chakra technique and as such, needed preparation from its caster. It just so happened that Hashirama was much faster than Orochimaru's reaction time that Orochimaru did not manage to use his life-saving technique before the blow landed. As the light was leaving Orochimaru's eyes and his eyelids started to drop, he lamented, "I guess I will have to use my contingency measures. How unfortunate." His soul left his body just as Hashirama sidestepped, letting it fall down onto the ground. Outside of the arena, Tsunade watched the exchange and she had to admit, her grandfather was strong. No wonder people called him a legend. She also relished Sarutobi's utter disbelief and hurt look when the sword entered Orochimaru's chest. The old monkey did not enjoy seeing his misguided student dying. Who knows, maybe I will be lucky and this will finally mentally break him enough to stop meddling in the politics of the village. Tsunade wistfully thought, knowing it was just not to be. Sarutobi was getting very close to the need to get rid of with my own hands category in Tsunade's books. As she contemplated these things, she suddenly felt something peculiar and chuckled. Orochimaru's soul did not dissipate as is natural for dead people. Instead, it was being pulled in a certain direction, only to be met with an impenetrable wall in the form of the ceiling barrier. The sucker definitely did not think that an anti-spiritual barrier would be a thing. Tsunade snorted as she manipulated the barrier, causing Orochimaru's soul to be stuffed into a vial she took out from her pocket. She looked at the bluish wispy substance in the vial and cooed, "So you want to be immortal?" Her lips stretched into a massive smile before she giddily added, "You can be my immortal guinea pig, then." Just his luck that Tsunade was in a dire need of somebody she could kill and resurrect as many times as she wanted in order to progress with her current research.